not going to be here crazy. Straight to this percent. Sorry about that.
I'll call her back. She's in the meeting.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Advisory Committee on Registered Nurse Education. I'm Leanne Wagner. I'm chair of the committee. And when I call the committee member's name, if you would indicate if you are here in the room, or some of you may be on the phone, and then we'll ask our visitors and those listening in to identify themselves. Peggy Allen.
Present by phone.
Great. We're glad to have you, Peggy.
I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you.
Patricia Allen.
Here at the meeting.
Joyce Batchelor. She indicated she was not going to be able to come. Barbara Cordell.
Present.
Eileen Dejas Curl. Eileen may be on her way because she indicated she was coming. She may be enduring the fog. Regina Jones Johnson will be joining us later. Josefina Lujan. We weren't sure whether she was going to be able to participate by phone or not. Yes, she just must not be on yet. Mary Elizabeth Mancini.
Present.
You have too many emails, and I always get that confused because you've always been Beth to me in this. Mary Mancini, who is she? Anna Mejia Dici.
I am present and in the room.
Okay. Deborah Simmons.
Present and in the room.
Mary Beth Thomas is coming. She may be delayed by the weather also. Chris Fowler.
Present in the room.
Donna Carlin.
Present in the room.
Elizabeth Mayer.
Present in the room.
Okay. Well, welcome to everyone. I'll ask, and Mary Beth Thomas has just joined us. So great. It was not supposed to rain today, so.
Famous last words.
So if the visitors in the room would introduce themselves. Susan? Welcome to all of you. And those of you that may be participating by phone, if you'd like to introduce yourselves. Bonnie, are you there? You've been to every meeting.
Maybe not.
So I guess Peggy is the only one who's participating by phone. Now, I heard more beeps than that. Okay.
Bonnie Higgins.
I'm sorry?
Bonnie Higgins.
Oh, Bonnie, there you are. I knew you'd be with us. Great. We're glad to have you. Before we get started with our business, I wanted to just go over a little bit of a review of the committee since this is really our, it's been a year since the committee has been started. So yesterday, Donna and Chris and Elizabeth and I met and kind of reviewed some of the things that we have done and learned as we've gone along. I think the committee is really coming along and functioning well. I think it took us a little while to kind of get ourselves together and decide exactly how we were going to organize ourselves. I think the subcommittees are working well, and I think that's how we're really going to accomplish things. I think we are doing well in terms of looking at the strategic plan that the Texas team has developed, which includes all the stakeholders and how we can really participate with that overall document that I think is very well thought out and has great potential to help us really organize all of our efforts across the state. So I think overall the committee has done very, very well. During lunch, we're going to be talking about the committee membership. As you know, some of the committee members' terms are up now, and a little bit later on we'll recognize those individuals whose terms whose current terms are up right now, and we'll talk about whether the committee feels like maybe we need to expand our committee, maybe we need to expand our subcommittees a little bit more, but I think that discussion can be helpful some of the things that we talked about yesterday afternoon was having an now that we think we have some idea of what we're doing, we might have an orientation for new members so that they can have the...
Hi, Pam Watson.
Hi, Pam. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
So new members might have our experience and some of the things that we've learned as they come on the committee. And we've had we've kind of made up the rules as we've gone along. And so maybe we can establish some parameters that would help the subcommittees and their members function and keep going as we move through the year, because it's so easy to get busy with things. So we talked about some of those kinds of things, maybe expanding some of our roles. But I think overall we should feel very good about the committee's work over the last year. There is much to do, but I think we have done a very good job of organizing things. And I really think the Texas Team Strategic Plan is going to help us and allow us to participate from our vantage point in that vein. So I just wanted to kind of give a little update of since this is our inaugural one-year meeting, because we had our first meeting March 12th, I think, last year. So with that in mind, you have the pink copy of the minutes, and I will entertain a motion for any changes or amendments to the minutes.
I'd like to move that we accept the minutes with the commendation for the note taker.
All right. Well, we will note that in the minutes. Yes.
She captured the essence of the meeting. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Moved by Barbara, seconded by Pat. And one thing I want to remind everybody, since we are broadcasting, we'll try and remember to say our names, especially for the minute taker also, who works very hard to make sure everyone gets credit for their comments. All those in favor, when I call your name, please indicate yes. Peggy Olland?
Yes.
Patricia Allen?
Yes.
Joyce Batchelor is absent. Barbara Cordell?
Yes.
Eileen Dejas Curl? Regina Jones-Johnson? Josefina Lujan? Beth Mancini?
Yes.
Anna Mejia Dichi?
Yes.
Deborah Simmons?
Yes.
Mary Beth Thomas?
Yes.
Okay, so all members of the committee agree that the minutes should be passed. Now we'll move on to our subcommittee reports. Would you like to approve each committee report separately, or let all the committees report and then approve them together? What is your pleasure?
Let's approve together.
Approve them together? Okay, Anna wants to approve them together. All right, well, we'll start with Barbara.
Be more efficient, right?
We'll only have to call roll once.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, this is Barbara Cordell, and I'm passing out a summary of our advisory committee, the subcommittee on capacity. And I do have extra copies if the visitors would have plenty.
Barbara, I need one more for Eileen if she comes.
I'm going to pass one back here, Dad. Okay, at the top we've got our subcommittee members listed, and we have lost one member, and I think we could probably use another one. If anybody knows of someone representing industry that we could add to our committee, we would really appreciate that nominee. We've been working on the objectives. I think we've got 3 immediate objectives, and really number 2 and number 3 are becoming long-term objectives as we look at them. The second one, to foster existing relationships and help support new collaborations. I know that Anna's been working on that. We did with the committee, we kind of divvied up the objectives, and different people have taken lead on different objectives, and so Anna was looking at this one on existing relationships. we thought we would develop a map of existing relationships, and I know from reading the Texas Team report that a lot of this is being done, so we're not going to duplicate effort here. We're really going to just collect the data that is being done by that team. There was a collection of that data in 07, I believe March of 07, and that's being done again March of 09. So we're going to look at the existing partnerships, and I know a lot of that's happening this weekend at the summit. But we also thought about taking some of that, not everybody's going to be at the summit, so we're going to look at the Deans and Directors group also to collect that information. And then identify gaps, identify when, and C really has become irrelevant because of Texas Team. They're really, I noticed that they put that big effort on regional partnerships, so I know the regional information is being collected as we speak. So that will be available to us. The thing that we're really looking at is that word foster existing relationships. Our committee wants to look at where are the gaps. If there aren't partnerships in existence with a certain school, let's see how we can cultivate that. So to contact the School of Nursing, identify possible partners, help convene initial meetings. So really fostering those partnerships where they don't exist, even assigning a mentor to help incubate new projects where feasible. So we're really moving forward on that. There's a lot of data out there, and we want to look at it, and we want to move forward in fostering. And then, of course, we want to prepare a summary document on the best practices, looking at the 13 grants that are going on right now, as well as what's been done in the past related to partnerships. Our objective number 3, fostering private foundation awareness and investment in nursing education capacity building. I wasn't able to get a hold of Sue Ann Lopez and Jan Keller before I came to this meeting, but I know they are looking at that. And actually that was, I think, Anna, you were the one that suggested that in the first place, so we may put you on that to look at more at the private foundation work, simply because you know more about it. Or if we can get another person on the committee that's interested in that area, we certainly want to look at it. Then our long-term objectives, examining traditional and non-traditional faculty roles. We are looking closely at online programs. We're also using the history of the increased capacity grants that have been done, the innovation grants. We did do a survey of the deans and directors of nursing schools. We're still collecting those data, and spring break was in the last couple of weeks for almost all the schools in Texas. And so those reports are still coming in, those surveys are still coming in. And we're going to, I'm collecting, if anybody has innovation grant information out there, I know some people have published and some people haven't. And the ones that haven't, we're really trying to find out what happened at the end of that grant. Was it just, that was it, or did they go further in implementing what had happened with the grant? So we're in the process of collecting those data right now. And then our ultimate goal with that objective is to make recommendations on best practices. Then the second long-term objective, examine compensation for faculty and faculty extenders. I know that we talked about that at our last meeting, that Texas Team had decided not to look at that, and the reasons that the legislature has done what they think they've done as far as that's concerned. But our committee really did not want to drop that issue. We still want to keep it in the forefront, simply because every document that we look at, when we talk about a new curriculum model, one of the things they say, the reason that we don't have increased capacity is because of lack of faculty, and anytime you look at lack of faculty, money is an issue. So we just don't want to let that issue go. We want to keep it at the forefront, and we are collecting data, survey it from deans and directors. We're getting information from the workforce folks on, I understand there's some data gathered there. Alexia Green told me that there's a survey out there. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm
2006 data.
okay. Okay, good. I'd like to get hold of that. Plus, we're updating with 2009 information from Texas schools. And then, of course, Texas Team, everything they're doing, we're watching closely so we don't duplicate efforts. Then our third goal, examine the use of educational technology in didactic and clinical instruction as a means to increase capacity. We've got all this noise going on. Is that, I didn't know if people were trying to sign on.
If you can, if you're listening by phone, if you can mute your phone, that will be helpful, because we're getting a lot of background noise here. So that would be good if you could mute your phone. Thank you.
Just don't put us on hold, because then we have to listen to your music, right? Okay, so Bunny is here today. Bunny Forgione was looking at our educational technology, and we're collecting information on simulation. Is one of those that's a little bit harder to capture. We've got a lot of people doing simulation, and I know there were some funded grants out there that we're certainly looking at, but we're also trying to capture that from the different schools of what's going on with simulation. We're looking at, and this ties in with the faculty innovation, we're looking at non-traditional faculty roles. How many schools are doing distance type classes, online, ITV? The preliminary results are still coming in, but it doesn't look like that many are doing, are offering online and ITV education. I know that there are some plans. Pat was telling me last time about you have plans at Texas Tech for an online program. Have you started that yet? It's on.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going. Okay. So there's a lot out there going on that I guess we haven't captured yet, so we're looking at that. And Bunny, do you have anything you want to add to that report?
Bunny, do you want to step up to the
that's
microphone?
Those that are, we, of course, at A&M, as Leanne knows well, have E-Line, and of course that is a generic program that's completely online. We've had a lot of success with that, but we'd like to, the same thing, faculty is still the problem. So maybe look at other faculty roles, part-time, people who are working part-time, people who are retired but would like to teach, and maybe having faculty that are shared within the state for that one, for the online curriculum. Anyway, we'll keep you posted. We're still looking at it.
Good. This is Barbara again. I know that's a big issue of, when I retire, I want to teach part-time. I think that's a great idea. And there is some overlap, as I said, with some of these committees, but we'll definitely share information back and forth so we don't duplicate. And then we want to make recommendations on best practices in that area. Then evaluating the feasibility and benefits of centralizing common functions. Marcia Irwin was taking the lead on that. Again, we've got Texas team that's doing a lot with the regionalization right now, so we're not going to duplicate that effort, but certainly capitalize on what they're collecting and certainly make recommendations based on that information. But we're not going to reinvent the wheel there. It's already happening. And the last one, evaluate the feasibility of developing a statewide process for selecting and orienting preceptors. Beth Mancini is taking the lead on that. And we're looking at models in other states. We have lots of resources out there on the internet. I mean, you can Google preceptors for nursing and get thousands and thousands of hits. And then we're also looking at the Texas models. You want to make any other comments on that?
I think Anna and I are going to communicate at this meeting to get us moving forward more forcefully in this task.
Well, and I have to say, I just went through NLNAC accreditation 3 weeks ago, so my time is going to be much more dedicated to this committee this coming year. I'm glad to have that behind me. So I understand. And that's it.
Congratulations for surviving, because that is a big, big task.
We all know about that, don't we? Yes. So thank you, and that's it for our committee.
Okay.
This is Donna. I think the Houston-Galveston area has done a lot as far as orienting preceptors, and don't they have a standardized process that they use for?
The Winter Project?
Yeah.
I think they developed something online.
That might be a really good model to look at what they've done that's already been established.
Yeah, we will start with what clearly has been the output of the work that's been done in Texas, as well as look more broadly. That's part, again, of the research committee's goals and objectives, is to really get better translation of the research into practice, as opposed to these sitting in a pocket. Winter comes up with wonderful things, and it sits there. Mm-hmm. So how do we disseminate? And so that's the overlap between the two committees' works, clearly, but we won't forget that.
Other comments about the committee report or questions? I had a question, Barbara. Have we identified any individuals that could be mentors? We talked about assigning a mentor. Do we have a group that your committee has identified that could be a resource for?
Not yet, but I think once we see those regional partnerships, that's really going to help us identify who's making it work that could then turn around and mentor some of the schools that have not created those partnerships yet. I can't remember what meeting somebody said, yeah, we've had so many meetings. The hospital, was it in the Houston area that $10 million was donated to the hospital or to the college for, capacity increasing kinds of activities, and so those kinds of partnerships are really models, but we have to identify where are those and what's happened with them now before we can assign mentors. But that is the intent, right? And it would help, again, like I said, we really would love another member from industry to help us with those ideas, especially someone who's already partnered with the educational institutions. So if anybody knows.
We did a survey on partnerships, and that's on our website.
Oh, okay.
We have a lot of information
when was that done?
on our. It's under nursing education and innovation. There's a whole area on innovation, and a big part of that was our survey on partnerships that we did last year.
Oh, last year. Okay, great. Well, that'll help us a lot. Excellent. I do remember being asked about that. I wasn't aware that it was posted.
Step up, Suzanne.
It's not about the partnerships, it's more about the online technology.
Sure.
We gathered some limited data in the NEPIS questionnaire on that. Would that be useful for you to
Absolutely.
see? It's,
yes.
It's very limited. I think we asked one question and we had 4 choices. To what extent do you teach courses online? Do you have a full program online, or just selected courses, or there was one other, and then nothing. But we do have the results of that information.
That would be fabulous, because then we have 100% of the schools that have submitted that information. And a lot of times when we send out a survey, we don't get that full participation. So that would be very helpful.
And would we, I could send it to you, I know, in aggregate form. Would you want it school by school, or?
I think yes.
And is that
that allowed?
Yes.
To release it
Oh,
that way?
absolutely, sure.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
We can do that.
Does anyone in our telephone audience have any comments or questions? Okay, and if there are no other comments by the committee, we'll go on to retention and graduation with Pat Allen and Mary Beth Thomas. Thank you.
Everyone get a copy?
This is the subcommittee. This is Pat Allen. It's a subcommittee on student retention and graduation. And I have a handout which we can send to all members after the meeting. I don't have it out for the people who are joining us by conference call. We met, the last meeting we've had was on the 20th. I think that date was right, Mary Beth? Anyway, our committee was met to discuss the formation of a subcommittee, which really is now called a...
Pat, I hate to interrupt you. I just want to acknowledge that Regina has joined us.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
We met to discuss the formation of a subcommittee to address Hispanic retention with membership from the Upper Rio and Lower Rio Grande Valley. And actually, our subcommittee supported the formation of a subcommittee, which now we call a
subcommittee.
No, we did that for a couple of days, but now we're calling it an ad hoc task force.
Oh, good idea.
And Josie came up with that term. So Dr. Josefina Lujan, who's a member of our subcommittee, is chairing that ad hoc task force. And they had one meeting, and their membership is listed here. And I'm not sure that these were all the we had received a list of recommended membership, but these are the people that she's been able to. And if Josie's on there, she can speak to this. But she's been able to contact, and they joined her for the first meeting, which was March 13th. And as you can see from the handout, they developed some mission and purpose statements that are listed here, and I can read those for you. Did you want me to read for the minutes the membership list, or you can just get that off of there? Okay. But the task force is going to identify commonalities in relation to the student population at each of the schools of nursing in the Upper and Lower Rio Grande Valley. And they're going to identify common challenges that these schools of nursing are facing in relation to retention of Hispanic nursing students, and review existing evidence on nursing student retention strategies, especially for Hispanic nursing students, and to develop and test strategies to promote retention and success for diverse students, diverse nursing students. And so this is their charge, and their next meeting is going to be April 30th. They also reviewed the Team Texas plan and had some discussion about that. There is some discussion, and I think they need some time to talk about that before we bring that back to the committee. But their next meeting will be on April 30th. Our task force, a long time ago, our subcommittee had come up with gone through our objectives and made our recommendations, and I just appended these again in case at one meeting we decide to talk about them individually. We haven't had an opportunity yet. This last meeting was focused on this other objective, but we haven't had an opportunity to really go back and prioritize what is really critical in all of these recommendations. So obviously, all of these things won't be possible. Anything else, Mary Beth? Josie, are you there? No.
Any questions or comments for Pat regarding her report? Any comments from those who are participating by telephone? Okay. If not, then we'll go on to Beth.
The research committee has 3 overarching goals. The first of that is to coordinate and communicate between the members of the groups that have received grant funding through the Higher Education Coordinating Board. Second, to identify ways to foster dissemination or translation of the findings of these studies, both past and current, into practice across the state to enhance the uptake, if you will. And third, to look at research that can be done in the areas that are covered by ACORN. In the first area, we did have our meeting and brought the grantees together. Some of those grants, because they're one-year funding, actually they're coming to an end. We're preparing a summary reports that will be included on the website as a mechanism for distribution of that information. We've discussed the importance of identifying threads and strands through the grant so that individuals could go on and, if you will, kind of have a cookbook. How could you search for this information? If your issue is graduation rates, where would you find it? Because sometimes the title's not enough to get you there. So that's a goal, is come up with an indexing or naming conventions that will allow us to do that across past and current studies. The issue of continued funding sustainability, what are the strategies that individual schools are using? Once the direct funding is gone, that remains a challenge for people. No clear solution to that problem, but discussion continues. In the area of providing information to Chris, in our meeting we actually did look at several ideas, questions that Chris had come up with, and provided her some input in the possibility of grant themes for future grant funding cycles. We've provided her input on the notion of the value of having an outside consultant on grants, both small and large, what values those brings and what value they bring and how they can be best configured, because they do become in the larger grants a requirement. And so those are things I believe Chris will bring back to this committee when it's time to make a final overall decision. I think it comes through you. On the issue of developing new research, as a follow-up to the last conversation at this meeting, when Anna had brought the information on the advisory board's report on closing the preparation practice gap, the committee did look at that and feel that it would be appropriate and doable to do a statewide review of a replication study. Communication with the authors at the advisory board indicate they're willing to do that with appropriate recognition to them, which of course we would do. And Glenda at SFA was going to be looking at coming up with the infrastructure for that. And unfortunately, of course, yes, it was the stimulation of having to come back and report to this committee, I will admit to such. As I've tried to reach her over the last week or 10 days, UTA's emails will not be picked up by SFAs. They get bounced back as undeliverable. So I have to go, my God help us, a telephone route, which I have not been able to do while I've been on the road. So I must say I've not had a chance to touch base with her and update that. But she had graciously offered in part of their research infrastructure to try to put together a Zoomerang or SurveyMonkey process to do that and get that sent out. So hopefully I'll be able to communicate the old-fashioned way with them and get that information. You know how dependent we become if you can't just push send? It's amazing.
And it's so frustrating if it keeps coming back.
It's
like,
undeliverable, undeliverable. So I don't know if it's on their end or ours, but something about that email doesn't work. So those are the activities that we've been actively involved in, and I'll take any questions. Anybody online have a question?
This is Bonnie Higgins. I have a question.
Yes, Bonnie.
As far as, if I understood that right, concerning the the practice and the preparation for practice research, is that going to include more than just a yes, they're prepared, no, they're not? Will it give education some details of how, because we've always known, practice has always said they're never ready.
Yes. Have you been able to see the tools that are actually published? I'm sorry, I didn't hear your response.
No, I had not.
Okay. It's a 38 competencies are assessed, and they actually, and we hope to be able to do this, that's the question, would like to be able to look at it as they did in the national survey, which got to the level of, are they adequately prepared in critical care, med surg, PD and OB. We would never forget OB. That was a specific request from Leanne. So we are intending to try to do that. It depends on what we're able to do with the depth of the development of the survey tool. But in this national, they did actually get down to that level.
Okay, but that's just the subject content, a broad area. Again, do we have a reverse of that where, okay, where is the cutoff of where education is accountable and where does practice begin, their accountability for this student? In other words, I'm thinking of residency programs and things like that. Are we looking at those kinds of issues as we look at this?
No, that's outside the scope of this. The questions here are, given these 38 competencies, where the questions are asked in specific service areas, are they prepared with these competencies when they graduate? I'm hearing your question, Bonnie, to be, is it our responsibility as educators or the service partner's responsibility as employers to get them to that competency level is a different question, and it is not asked in this survey, though it could be built into a question whether you expect them to come fully functional or would they accept would employers accept some level of responsibility for this. But I think we would, that's such a whole other set of characteristics.
Yeah, it's kind of a novice expert question is really what I am looking at, is the preparation and not having seen that document, because we have to have information in order to act. I mean, you know, so just wanted to be very specific enough that we've got something when we have it, and not looking at the not knowing. And I'll find that competency, 38 competencies where.
We do have copies of the report. It's a 2-volume report. It's fairly extensive, and Chris is nodding her head that indeed we have copies of it, so we can make sure you get one.
Okay, that'd be great.
But I do hold that thought, and let's continue to work on that thought about where from unconsciously incompetent to unconsciously competent along that range, novice to expert, where should they exit the education program? That's an important question. It's just a different one.
And I think it leads from, once we find out where they are, what we're really trying to find out in the state, what is the perception of where they are? Are they meeting these competencies? Then the next collaborative would be, okay, if they're not, then how can we collaborate between practice and education to bridge that gap? Education may have to give a little and push a little, and practice the same.
Because amongst the 38 competencies, there are some where there's agreement they come out competent, and that's not an issue. So we'll tease it down to the actionable few that we need to address.
This is Mary Beth Thomas. We're having the same discussion with the DELCEs. You know, we're working on the DELCEs, and these same themes are coming up in our committee meeting, too. And we will be doing a survey of the DELCEs, and may want to talk about or look at some overlap, or how we can approach this and be comprehensive. So
yeah, I think that would be very important, Mary Beth, that we coordinate so we don't double survey people in slightly different ways, and then you end up with information that can't be brought together. So what might we do in order to make that happen?
Well, I think maybe some discussion with the research committee about really essentially, do we want to look at those specific competencies? What's the main goal? Because I think the whole practice education expectation, interface expectation is the issue here, and what are we really trying to do in terms of investigate it, address issues, that whole mechanism. So I think that DELCE's actually meeting on Monday and Tuesday, and maybe there's just some dialogue between the two committees.
Well, if this committee would agree, I think it would be very important so we don't duplicate work.
Exactly.
The goal in using the 38 competencies of that the advisory board board's tool is it does provide us a national comparison, and that is important, I think, so that we know where we're unique and where we're not. So if we could, I don't know how, maybe at the break, Mary Beth, would the committee agree that it would be important for us to work together with the board's activities around DELCE?
Yes, I think there's general consensus that really would be highly desirable.
Okay. So we'll find a way to do that.
And we were hoping Eileen could give us a little report on ACE and DELCEs, but maybe at lunchtime Mary Beth could tell us a little bit more about where everything is at that point. Beth, I also have a question. Your recommendation about the use of a consultant for the smaller grants, which I think is a very good idea, and I think most individuals who receive smaller grants would certainly welcome that. Did you, what sort of role did you see this consultant in terms of one consultant for all the grants, or just the fact that the smaller grants needed a consultant for evaluation, I'm assuming?
We discussed lots of options. Well, I shouldn't say lots of options. Several options. One is that each grant had its own. Should that individual be in-state, in-region? What were the benefits? What are the efficiencies and costs? By saying you have some that kind of a cadre that overlook. If you have a theme, that starts making it useful to be able to have an individual who crosses multiple studies. The ability for somebody to be looking across discrete studies to help bring together what are the commonalities. The importance of having consistent measurement elements in each of the grants. and helping from an external, not only expertise, but a little further away from the forest, so you can see the trees perspective of making sure we're measuring the right things. So directly to your question, did we come up with an ultimate recommendation? It was not in the form of a motion to Chris. It was a discussion item where we provided input. But the general characteristics, I hope Chris took away from it, were that we do think having someone over more than a single study is a good thing. That to the extent it goes to themes, having an individual that's over the themes is a good thing. To make sure that the grant has adequate funding in it to get someone that has a level of expertise, not only in the narrow focus area, but in the research design area, was important. And what were the others? And small as well as large.
Yes.
So I think those may have been the 3 characteristics. Chris, have I forgotten anything that we gave you? I think were you at that meeting, Mary Beth? And Anna?
Yeah.
Anything you want to add on consulting conversation?
Sounds right to me.
And again, from this group's perspective, does that seem reasonable as an approach?
I think we've seen some really significant advantages in having outside consultants come in and look at projects to get with the principal investigators and give them feedback on their evaluation tools, the progress of the reports. And in the past, we've only used outside consultants or required them for the very large grants. I know Leslie Mayrand at Angela State University has a large 3-year grant, and Beth Mancini has a large 3-year grant. And I guess the question to the committee was, is there a benefit, albeit a cost, to providing that coordination to more grants regardless of size? So that was the kind of feedback we were hoping to look for.
And I think the consultant up front really helps, especially small grants, individuals that are new to doing grants. It helps them collect the right data, because halfway through the grant, then if they then get a consultant, it's like, oh, I should have been doing this. So I think that's a key factor, because you think you know, but sometimes until you get into it, if you haven't done it before, then you're in the middle of it, and then you realize, oh my God, I should have been collecting this other data. So I think that would make things so much better, especially for smaller grants and for individual schools that are smaller and are just beginning to utilize the grant process.
And even from the large grant, having a single, both Leslie and myself have felt was an unexpected secondary gain to come together more closely because we work with a single consultant.
Yes.
And that ability to find the synergies you would not have had if you were separate. Not that you can't have caused it to, it just won't necessarily happen that way.
Right.
And this is a structural way to make that happen. Yeah. So it was very good. We were both very appreciative of it.
I think the whole idea that Chris has gotten all the grantees together on a routine basis has been very, very positive. I think that has really been very, very positive, because small new grantees then can learn a tremendous amount from very experienced programs and individuals that have done this for a long time.
And on a technical basis, it's one of the things that we need to advise the grantees or the applicants to build into their grant requests, because Chris post hoc said it was okay to do that, but we need to tell them that they need to plan on 2 meetings a year in Austin, in some central location to discuss and create that synergy.
Other questions or comments about the grant? Donna?
I had a question about the prior topic about, where education leaves off and practice takes over. I know that there are a lot of really sophisticated programs that the hospitals are using for their orientation, like, was it the Versant program? Are these all, is the data that's produce considered proprietary? Are they able to share with the schools?
Yeah, it's proprietary.
It is proprietary, so there isn't much sharing of what the findings are to give schools feedback about.
I think that varies. There are programs that there are employers, particularly the large systems, who share data back to their large producers, if you will, their schools of nursing with whom they work most frequently, or where they hire the most graduates. So I think there is some feedback, but it is not good feedback in the sense of it's not consistent. It is not necessarily in depth to the level that we need. And all schools are required to survey as part of their accreditation processes, if they're accredited by NLNAC or CCNE, to get surveyed. But the return rates on those are very small, single digits typically.
And I just want to add that Versant has shared their data. We had a conference in Lubbock last spring, and they were one of the presenters and had shared the data that they have gotten in the Austin area with working with the Seton health system. So, and have also opened themselves up to using it for secondary data analysis for research through our center at Tech.
But isn't it aggregated?
Yeah.
We've had certainly the thematic piece, but I don't know that we've had the school breakdown.
Well, we got the data, or are getting the data from them on our second degree students, so I know that they can pull that data.
And that's where there are great opportunities to bring employers and educators together, because it gets down to the specifics of the school. I think what we saw in the preparation practice gap document is what we know to be true is, of course, schools believe they are producing what they need to produce. They're working very hard to do that. It's the gap between what the employers see, and it's not that one is right and one is wrong, it's just that the operational definitions are often different. And until we can get to the level of unpeeling the onion down to that very specific of the graduates of Texas Tech versus the graduates of the University of Texas at Arlington, it's hard to make changes on an individual school level. Even to the level of the state, when you're talking about the DELCs, unless we are absolutely crystal clear we have operational definitions that are unambiguous, then how I respond to it as an employer will be more or less useful. And I think that's where we've slipped up many times, is we assume what it means to say competent. My operational definition as an employer of competency was different than when I was an employer, is different than the schools of nursing might be. Not right, not wrong, just different. And so how do we bring that together?
Right. I mean, it seems like a great opportunity to really finally be able to say, for the practice to work with education and get things straight. I mean, we've heard forever that, the schools aren't producing competent graduates, and now that there's real data out there, it seems unfortunate if it can't be used to finally close that gap.
And this is Ann, and what I've seen, since we were able to bring that report to our local committee and have it with our conversation with industry and education here, was that, even though there was national data and lots of respondents, people want their own information. I mean, they need it to believe it, kind of thing, and that particularity, I've been increased, especially after we've now gone through a few months of discussion and coordination around this issue. I'm very excited, since this thing came up when I first started working with your profession, that we have some particulars to work from. I think will help the discussion a lot.
And I think if we can aggregate the data in different ways also, we can see if there is a different expectation from small rural facilities and large metroplex facilities also, which I think is very important depending on where schools are located as well. Because obviously schools do think, and they meet all the time with the people who employ their nurses, and they say everything is fine and dandy, and then we get this thing of the hospitals are not happy with the graduates, and we're like, but they keep telling us on an individual basis that they are. So there's some kind of disconnect somewhere. And you're right, Nana, we have been talking about this since at least 1973 when I started teaching, so maybe we will once and for all be able to get some data and take a look at it so we can begin resolving it, maybe on a regional basis. Maybe we can't resolve it. You know, maybe a graduate from my program can't go to work at Herman, you know, right off the bat. Maybe that's, you know, not possible.
I think that's a big piece, too, this Mary Beth. What are the employer's expectations? Mm-hmm. And they could be by
very,
the
very
employer.
different.
That's exactly right. Whoa, talk about a variable.
Right.
And the other part of the world that's shifting is, for whatever reasons, hospitals have built fairly robust orientation programs. And we may believe that's appropriately so, the responsibility of the employer of a new grad. What we do know is the funding to hospitals, as they are decreasing, that's the first place where things get cut. So even if we at one point were really crystal clear about these expectations and who owned the expectation, two different variables. What are they and who owns them? The world is changing literally as we speak, and the shift is of course going to be to the other. Regardless of who you are, it's going to be to the other. The employers want the schools to do more of the readiness to practice, and the schools are saying, well, as things get tight for schools, the employer can do more of the readiness to practice. So coming together and being crystal clear, objectively, about what we mean when we say words is important.
Yeah, I think that's true. Deborah.
This is Deborah. I just have one comment about it, just from putting on my hat in safety and quality again about it, which is the only way that I can really approach this. You know, one thing we absolutely know is that when you have variation in your approaches to anything, you're going to have variations in your outcomes. We know that we have to decrease variation, and that I absolutely recognize the role of autonomy in different campuses for putting together programs and putting together the way they approach this. And coming from a large academic medical center area, I hear what you say about preparation for practice that would go to a rural and community hospital and what their needs are versus a Herman, a Texas Children's Hospital, where they use a lot of technology and such. That said, however, we have got a wide variation in practice for nursing in the way that nurses are prepared, and especially most concerning for me is the idea of doing away clinical practice hours that is indeed facing us this legislative session, and is extremely important when you look at the way nurses will be entering the profession at this point, whether or not it will be a quick process where I don't have to go to clinical and I don't have to spend those torturous hours with the clinical instructors, and I'll sign up for that when I've been one of those for the last 12 years. I am one of those people. Or I want to go this other route where I do have to go through this clinical experience, go through all the steps in the process of critical thinking and development. So I would urge us to put a lot more emphasis on this subject out of this committee and try, if we can, to come to some sort of reason about it. Because in the competitive market that we've got now for nurses, certainly if this House bill and Senate bill goes through, I would see that it's going to greatly impact the enrollment in these nursing programs. If students have a choice of going completely online, no clinical, we don't have to worry about that, or they have a choice of going the traditional route. And I would hate to see us walk into that world unprepared with no data about what is really needed to form a consistent baseline for competent nursing practice and safe nursing practice at this point.
And that may be relevant also later in our agenda. We're going to talk about where we kind of started with the new curriculum design and a model for a somewhat common curriculum across the state, and taking a look at that, and I think that may be certainly relevant to that very idea. So, Eileen, are you there anywhere out there? She may be stuck somewhere between here and Houston, I don't know. But if we don't have a report from that committee, I think we'll take about a 10-minute break and then come back and move on to our next agenda item.
Oh, you want to vote?
For the retention and graduation subcommittee, we had talked a lot, and I think you have talked a lot about the financial aid status, and I just wondered if you could just give us a little summary of kind of where the committee is on that particular area.
Okay. I think it's on page 4 of the handout that the committee prepared for today. And the recommendations, what we did was we consulted with Jane Caldwell, who is our outside advisory. She was advisory to the subcommittee. And Marcus Wilson, who's the financial aid officer at Texas Tech, just to get a financial aid officer's perspective. And so those are the recommendations that, after talking to those 2 individuals and then the group getting together, one of the things was to look at the composition of the current financial aid advisory committee for nursing scholarships and determine if the membership to that committee is appropriate for today's needs, and then call the group to order again. Apparently they've been...
I don't think that group is met because I was on it for a number of years, and I think because of the lack of funds, the committee just has not met.
And then there were some, when we went over the list on that committee, and Mary Beth might recall better, this was last fall, we talked about this, but there were members on that committee that really have not anything to do with nursing.
Yes.
A disability group. Some people that Jane pointed out to us that we might want to rethink about.
The membership.
Who would be appropriate for that committee given today's circumstances. And then the other recommendation is to provide the majority of financial assistance, aid and assistance for pre-licensure RN education to maximize the current funds and provide these funds through scholarship programs. And I guess that was the strongest recommendation. And then another recommendation, which always seems to happen to the board in many meetings I'm in, is to obtain scholarship funding from licensure fees, the general revenue funds, and obtain federal funding to match state money if available. And that's something that hasn't been pursued as strongly as our 2 outside advisors thought it could have been, the match money from the federal level. And then,
this was not in existence when you all met, and I don't even know if it's possible, but is any of the stimulus money available for any kind of scholarships? Does anyone have any idea if all this money is coming?
The stimulus money has a lot of money for training.
And they were supposed to be increasing Pell some, so I didn't know if there was any targeted.
And if y'all want, I can forward a list. AACN did kind of a summary of what was where and all
the stimulus.
And I think I have another report. So if y'all want, I can forward that to the committee. The 2.
That might be good because we don't want to miss out on any opportunity, particularly since federal funds have not been as plentiful as we would like.
And the other recommendation was to explore flat rate tuition to encourage students to graduate on time and decrease the financial burden following graduation. And this recommendation came from one of our committee members who is in San Antonio area where they've done this, and it has worked well for them to get people to graduate on time. And the example that we used was the timely graduation program that's also being piloted by UT Austin in flat rate tuition. And I don't know, Regina, have you heard anything about that? Or
the students have been really receptive to it, and the faculty and staff have been very supportive. And it's something that the president thinks is the thing to do to help our students.
It's really just a financial incentive to reduce the time to graduation, not really financial aid. And then, of course, encourage hospitals to provide student stipend programs and determine and publish a list of hospitals across the state, which could be the best partner hospital list as far as best partners for seeking financial assistance, not best partners in a nurse-friendly kind of a way. And that list could be shared with schools and nursing students and advisors as an avenue for students to seek financial assistance. And then the last one was to explore financial assistance programs providing full tuition fees and books, child care, transportation, emergency assistance, and use Capital IDEA as the model.
Yeah.
And Aviva Project in El Paso.
comes in.
Okay, good. Well, I think that was important for us to kind of focus in on the financial aid because we had talked about it early on and then had not said a lot of specifics about financial aid. So I appreciate that, Pat. Are there any other comments or questions about any of the committee reports? And if Eileen comes or begins participating in any way, we'll ask her to give her report, and if not, why we'll ask her to send us something for the minutes. If not, do I hear a motion to approve the reports?
Anna, so moved.
Is there a second?
Deborah, second.
Okay, when I call your name, if you would vote yes if you're in favor of approving the reports. Peggy Allen.
Yes.
Patricia Allen.
Yes.
Barbara Cordell.
Yes.
Eileen, are you there? I remain hopeful. Regina Johnson.
Yes.
Josefina Lujan. Beth Mancini.
Yes.
Anna Mejia Dici.
And yes.
Deborah Simmons.
Yes.
Mary Beth Thomas.
Yes.
All are in favor, so all the reports have been approved. Thank you very much, and we'll talk a little bit later about some ways that we have, Chris and Donna and Elizabeth and I talked about that may help your committee kind of continue their momentum in between meetings, which is very difficult to do, I know. So we'll talk about some things that might be helpful there. So now we are ready for explanation of the rules for the Nursing Education Performance Initiative and its application in calculating 2008 graduation rates. And I will turn it over to Chris in the purple document.
I've talked about these rates before, but they're having growing importance as we move through the legislative session, so I thought I would discuss them again. I think, this is a relatively new performance measure for the coordinating board and for the nursing programs to, in essence, respond to. And we're learning here at the coordinating board as much about these performance measures as you are in looking at them and maybe in relation to other nursing programs in the state. And of course, as I alluded to, there's some special early attention to these very new performance measures. As you know, a nursing coalition used this measure to determine how schools might receive any new state funds that the legislature provides for presumably building capacity in our nursing programs, which is, of course, all of our goals when we look at the projections for the need for new nurses in the state. So there, Beth could probably talk about this a little bit more, but I'll just summarize it by saying that if you have a graduation rate, at least as of the 2007 graduation numbers, of 70% or above, you were to get a line item appropriation in your agency's bill pattern in the appropriation bill. And if it was below 70%, which was the state average, you were to enter into an MOU with the coordinating board and receive your funds through that type of an agreement. And then, of course, based on that scenario, everyone wanted to be part of the 70 above club rather than the 70 and below club. And so when the first 2007 graduation rates came out, they were, well, maybe a surprise to some people, maybe not. And we've, since then, had the opportunity to provide to the legislature the most current 2008 graduation rates. And they should have been sent out to the programs this morning as an email. And they're available, at least for the people attending today, and those are the purple sheets. Let me just give you a little bit of background, and I hope not to bore people, but I want to say this again, that calculating graduation rates is a response from legislation that was passed last session. bill that Jane Nelson, Senator Jane Nelson, authored, asked us to develop a program to recognize nursing programs that had an 85% graduation or higher, and graduation rate or higher. And that 85% was based on the recommendations of a committee of nursing deans, directors, and faculty who participated in a report that was sent to the legislature in 2006. And of course, in order to recognize those schools, we had to determine a standard way of calculating those graduation rates. And the rules that are in front of you, labeled Texas Administrative Code, are the rules for what we call the Nursing Education Performance Initiative. And the rules for the calculation specifically are shaded, possibly. I'm looking at my sheet. Mine is not terribly shaded, but it's number 7 in the definition. So the calculation is based on 36 months of initial enrollment for 2-year programs and 18 months of initial enrollment for 1-year programs. That is our rule. And we lost my train of thought here. Let me back up and just say that how we calculate these rates is very consistent with how the coordinating board counts its 6-year graduation rates for the state's undergraduate student population. And in essence, we've sort of have that methodology, 6-year graduation rates for 4-year programs, and if you're a 2-year programs, it's a 3-year graduation rate. And that graduation rate methodology is what the Department of Education also requires of all states in the country. So what we're doing is applying that methodology to nursing programs. So it's basically 150%. And I think there's some misconception about my term of using 150%. I take some responsibility for some of the confusion out there in terms of what that 150% means. It means based on what a standard reasonable time to graduation is, regardless of the length of your program. It is, and so it's 150% if a school identified their program as, in essence, a 2-year program. It's 150% from a 1-year program. When we asked for the data, we recognized there were programs with longer programs, even shorter programs, but we said if you have a 15-month program, you're still going, and it's basically an LVN to RN program, you're going to call it a 1-year program. If you have a 2-year program that's shorter or longer than 24 months, it's still going to be calculated as a 2-year program with an additional 12 months for reporting students within a cohort as within the graduation rate. Have I made that clear? I think I've said it so many times I get confused about saying that.
And I know that there's a lot of discussion out there about this, because I think there has been, as Chris said, a perception that it's a finite amount based on the actual length of your program. And what we're saying is it is a reasonable amount based on a 1-year or a 2-year standard, not a finite amount of months in a program. So I think that has been the misconception. It's more standard than it is individualized to a specific program length. And I don't know how many programs actually have more than 4 semesters in the state, or less 2 semesters for LVN to ADN or LVN to RN. I have no idea about that. I suspect that's the norm to have a 1-year LVN to RN program in 4 semesters, but there are schools that vary from that. And Mary Beth, I don't know if you know that or not. Not carrying that piece of information around as a necessary component of your daily life, probably. So, but yes, to me it's clear. Does anybody have any questions about what Chris has said so far, or anyone in the audience, either here or via phone? Because I know there has been heated discussion at
I mean, we recognize that some programs are longer, and they're probably for good reasons. Potentially, you recognize you have a large student body that needs to work during the week, and a full load of, say, 15 semester credit hours is something that they can't successfully complete. We know that maybe you might have some faculty shortages, which does not allow you to offer a full array of courses, and so you're creating a longer program to accommodate those limitations. But again, we're measuring a reasonable time to completion, and in essence, if you're making it longer, you should be doing that because you're assuming you're going to have a higher rate of completion with this longer program. So again, the length of the program is not going to be, at this point, through our rules, adjusted with what we were referring to as that 150% rate of completion. Now, if you look at the 2008 rates, the statewide graduation rate was 68.83%. That's actually slightly lower than what we had reported in 2007, but not significantly. I think we were at about 69%. And partially because we included some programs that have problems with their data. We attempted to ask everyone to resubmit data that they thought was questionable when we first gave you the drafts of the rates. And we did receive some, I believe 10 schools that resubmitted different data. That's out of 80-something, so that's not a bad sign of the reliability of what you're submitting now to us and how we're calculating those rates. 16 schools had graduation rates of 85% or higher. Congratulations, those numbers are actually appear to be going up. I think previously it was 13 schools from 2007. That could just be random and luck, or it could be that people are really beginning to focus on those graduation rates as a performance indicator in the nursing program. There were 2 health-related institutions, 6 universities, and 8 community colleges that had a graduation rate of 85% or higher. 13 schools have a graduation rate and an NCLEX pass rate of 85% or higher, and based on our rules, they are eligible for recognition, which means we'll make a big to-do about them and send information to the governor and to the legislature of their accomplishments based on our rules. And we're working with Eileen's committee to finalize the application form that those schools will use to identify their best practices. Again, as I've said several times before, nobody gets a free lunch based on that 85% accomplishment. You'll need to show us those best practices in reaching those levels of results. And again, we're going to be submitting an application form probably in the next month or so where they'll have the opportunity to submit this information. So it accomplishes 2 things. Nobody gets a free lunch. And secondly, we're hoping to distribute those best practices to the schools, possibly maybe ask those schools to make formal presentations at the next meeting of the deans and directors would be an example of doing that. So again, everyone hopefully will benefit from those results, and I'm really interested to seeing what they may submit, because we obviously have a very diverse group of schools that are reaching those kinds of goals for the state. One other good thing out of this is because of the interest in these performance measures from the legislature as a key performance indicator, we've gotten some interesting feedback from the schools. One of them is to try to ensure better data. Again, the data that we've used for these calculations are coming from the institutions. And we know there are people who have problems out there. And again, it's going to be important for you to make sure that you are in line, you meaning the nursing deans, are in line with their registrars and the type of data that you're providing to the coordinating board. Other schools have made the comments, well, gee, how can we have best practices? And I've not been able to give them a really good answer, just some vague ideas about, you know, admission criteria, tracking at-risk students, various types of testing that I've heard about, but at least these best practices that we'll be hearing from these successful schools will help them refocus some of their activities. And other schools are reconsidering their long programs. If you do have a long program, make sure you're really getting the outcomes you need. And if you have those long programs because you're short-staffed in your faculty, here's your opportunity to go to your president and ask for more support in increasing those graduation rates. So we think it's a positive outcome for everyone. More positive for others, of course, but at least everyone can act on these results in a way that hopefully benefits the students and the state in producing more graduates. One other point, we have been doing some other research. We did look at the request of the legislature about the number of transfer students. Transferred students were excluded from these calculations, and we found that 67 more graduates could have been counted if we had included transfer students. And that's slightly more than 1% of all the graduates who reported graduating on time during this measure. We're also looking at ethnicity, and receipt of financial aid is a possible variable in success in these programs. We did that for the 2006 report, and we're going to do that again, same manner really, to see what those results might be. As we noticed on ethnicity, there wasn't a huge difference in 2006 about the success of students based on ethnicity. It might be different this time, possibly. Financial aid was a big difference. We found that schools that students that had received financial aid throughout their nursing curriculum had about an 85% graduation rate. Those who received less, even just 1 year's worth of financial aid, did not markedly change their success in the program. So consistency seemed to be the important element there.
Chris, I'm sorry, this is Meredith. Would you say that again, what you just said?
On financial aid, if a student received financial aid for the years that they were in the program consistently, they had about an 85% graduation rate. Okay. If it was just 1 year in that program, maybe one semester in 1 year, it really didn't make a difference in their completion of the program.
Would that also be reflective of how well they were doing in the program? Because you can lose your financial aid if you're not doing well.
Good point. There's a lot of opportunities for research here. I'm hoping that maybe Pat might be able to look at these numbers. There you go, Pat. We have 2 years worth of numbers here, and
10 years of work for your committee.
So I guess there's a lot of work to be done from people who've been very successful. We'll be submitting an application to you for information about your best practices, and for those who are maybe less successful, we're looking forward to you improving those rates and hopefully responding to how those best practices are described through the accomplishments of the schools that are doing a better way at keeping their students in programs.
Chris, I had two questions about it. One, this 8,567 that were reported as enrollees for 2008, how much was that up from 2007, do you recall?
You know, I haven't compared the 2000 versus 2000.
I wonder if as we reach capacity or increased capacity, if our retention may start falling for some schools that can't handle it. And the other question I had was on the list of the schools that were eligible. On the criteria under the eligibility that you gave us, it said 85% graduation rate and 85% NCLEX.
Yes.
I might have missed something in what you were saying, but
that's a shaded, right? They don't get an award. That's
three on there.
The three on there aren't getting the award.
There are three schools. You can't see that because it's purple.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But there are three schools in the middle of the table who are not eligible for recognition because they did not meet the 85%.
And you know what I want to say about this? I am delighted. You know, our pass rate is 80. I am delighted there's only one below 80. That's very good.
Yes.
Very good.
And once we have these in schools identified and published and well known to everyone, I wonder too if some of the schools who have fairly low graduation rates might not want to partner with the schools that have, particularly if they're in the same region, and work together because they would have similar student populations and similar employers and that sort of thing. So I think the regionalization idea, again, could be utilized to help some of those schools that have lower rates bring those rates up with some of the schools with high rates mentoring them, and that might be a way to help those schools so that there was another partnership built again.
And describing these programs in characteristics other than just number of enrollees. What this quick look at the data says to me is those who say small schools are disadvantaged might not say that's true. When you look at, there's probably an equal number of small, however you define small, but double digits, 43 number enrollees of 43, 63, 30 are on this list for recognition, as well as the ones that are 191, 196, 158. So we can see that. We can see the distribution of community colleges, universities, and health science centers. Those elements you gave, though, I think are very important. And being able to add perhaps those two more columns, something along ethnicity or traditionally underrepresented, and receiving financial aid, and then maybe what region they're in, so that we could really look to see. I think this looks like it's a fairly well-distributed group.
Yes.
But to Deborah's point, there's also wide variation. And how can we better understand that by understanding the successes and comparing to those that have not achieved those other, whatever, we've set a target to find the successes, 85 and 85. But is it possible to get those plugged in here, those other characteristics?
Well,
or how could we do that?
Possibly.
All things are possible, whether practically we can get it.
If it's by school, I didn't ask for that. I was trying to replicate the 2006 analysis that we did, which was not necessarily by school. And the other issue, I mean, it's certainly possible, but we also have a very busy education data center right now because of the legislature and their needs for different types of information, so it probably couldn't come quickly. I know they're working on the composite ethnicity and financial aid piece now. We may need to go back and look at it more specifically by institution, as you're suggesting. It would be really valuable. But probably not until after the legislature.
And nobody else has that data that could just do a crosswalk for these 90. Does any other? You don't keep it, Mary Beth? Okay. just would be nice.
It's all student-specific data.
Mary Beth, are you sure you don't have it?
I don't have ethnicity of the students.
Oh, maybe it's the coordinating board that we
report that to
somebody.
We report it all the time.
Suzanne, do you have it?
SREB.
No, but is it
I just filled out that survey this week.
the percentage of, within a school, what percentage of their student population is an aggregate?
I think the board collects that data because I have gone online.
Ethnicity?
And pulled it up.
Oh, the board.
Yeah, you can pull it up at the Nursing Council.
Yeah, we have the data. It's just the time to program the data.
I think we have that. We didn't get ethnicity.
For license.
You used to.
We used to, maybe. Of the student?
Of license.
And we're glad to have you here.
To the school.
The SREB collects it because I just filled that out last week.
We're on the
Right.
document right now.
Well, but we don't need it by student. We just need to describe the schools.
Oh, just describe the schools.
Describe the schools.
Okay, oh, well, we can do that.
Yeah.
Maybe more easily. I thought you were trying to cross-track it.
That's fine, that would be very important to know, so that we can look at other things. But to just speak to schools so they understand who are comparables,
Okay.
and we can say, there is distribution in these schools that have achieved 85, if they are all 100% Caucasian, you would say that maybe that's a characteristic that differentiates those who do from those who don't reach these targets. If they have 100% financial aid, then you could say something about that or start alluding to some things about that. But I will bet you there's probably some variation here that will help us say this distribution, there are best practices. It's not a unique characteristic such as that.
Would it be valuable to Susanna to also see what admission criteria are?
Well, then we could go back and pull that too. But that's not a simple table. We know that that's not a simple table. I'm just looking for simple descriptive statistics.
But at some point, that may be worth looking at individually.
Right.
Maybe not in table form, but getting that information, because I think that's one of the things that we've talked about, is having a common set of admission criteria to help us. Because if we have some schools that have very high admission criteria, then the 100 people that they admit are obviously going to have a much better chance of. And of course, community colleges, for the most part, all have open admission to the college, but they all have selective admission criteria, for the most part, for the nursing program. So,
another variable that can make a difference is the admission GPA as well, because that varies from school to school.
Right.
And some schools, depending on the applicants and the GPA of the applicants, that increases the ceiling of the GPA.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it changes from applicant pool to applicant pool, because most schools have a minimum, especially in community colleges. They tend to have a lower minimum and then rank. And so if you've got a highly qualified pool one year, then the average GPA may be 3.4, and the next year it might be 2.8.
And this is, Anna, as the schools are increasing capacity and we have more players here in Central Texas, it's certainly the community college is the one for whom the applicant pool becomes more diverse and challenging in terms of how qualified it is over time. So I think that it'll be an interesting trend to watch as we have added so many wonderful programs and opportunities.
And kind of back to the financial aid component, because some students at community colleges have used all their financial aid by the time they really figure out that they want to be a nurse, or they're going back to be a nurse, so they're not eligible any longer for financial aid. And that can, at least federal or state financial aid, if we can provide private scholarships, that's helpful. So that also plays a role.
That's something that our committee probably should speak to, too, because that very often happens to our second-degree students. They're in the same position. They've used up their financial aid eligibility. Maybe there should be something targeted towards people who want to be nurses to extend that.
Right.
I guess.
Let me note that Eileen Krill has joined us, and we are so happy that she made it here, alive and well.
Flew in from the sky. It was. I should have stayed home. I left at 4:15 this morning.
Oh my gosh!
And then
we could have driven and gotten here.
I couldn't get out of Beaumont because of the fog, and Houston the airport wasn't open. And then we got in the air, and then this airport closed because of the thunderstorm. So we were out circling around. But it's great to be here. So I was just going to say something about, when we talk about admission requirements, I know some schools require reading levels, and I'm real curious on, am I talking too loud?
I don't think so. Turn your microphone.
No. Sorry. That's the sky is still echoing from my airplane ride. So I'm real curious about what kinds of indicators like that schools are using that maybe would really tell us all what kinds of minimum criteria besides GPA, because we know GPA is not very predictive anymore.
Right.
I just wanted to point out that there were two things that were, I think, major findings from the study from 2006. First of all, schools used a variety of admission criteria. There was no set criteria. Maybe that's a good thing, but maybe there are best practices and we need to get to that. I know that Glenda Walker at Stephen F. Austin, near you, has found that reading comprehension is very important to success, more so than you might think. Most people focus on, I think, the science and math GPA, but she's finding that's very predictive. The second thing that we learned from the study, which was ambiguous, but ambiguous in a finding sort of way, was the fact that we don't have a really predictive way of identifying at-risk students. And we have, Glenda is working on a project through the Nursing Innovation Grant Program to be looking at that. Part of that reading comprehension came from that preliminary analysis, and so is Austin Community College. So again, identifying people most likely to succeed early on, and then helping those students even before they fail a course or even a test is very, very helpful. And we've got some models out there that are trying to make those predictions early to ensure the student's success.
Well, that's really interesting, Chris. Following up on that, a coordinating board grant we got about 4 years ago, the Caring Place grant, we targeted students who achieved below 75% on the HESI admission test. But we told them about that. We told them what we would recommend, and we let them come to our Caring Places, which is our retention kind of area, and they wouldn't come. So it is multifaceted regarding that, but I'll be very interested in seeing what. I think a lot of times I think they're so overwhelmed, and what happens with people is you pull in, and even though the resource is right next door, you don't seek out. So I think it's more like case finding. You actually have to go find them and pull them in, because even though we see them as adult learners, I don't think they often are able to function at that capacity because they're so overwhelmed.
Chris, do you recall when her report is due out? I can't bring it to recollection. When Glenda's report is...
Well, her report would be at the end of this fiscal year, so it should be October 1.
Might it be worthwhile to have her do a presentation to this group in the following meeting so that she could share all of that, because it is a very rich database that she has collected with many implications, and the opportunity, I think, to feed all of the subcommittees of ACORN on selection, retention, and success.
Okay, great. How about Austin Community College? Anna, I'm just looking at you because you know Eileen well and talk to her frequently. Does she have anything at this point that she could share with the committee?
I do think she has some interesting stuff, and in fact, and I don't know that she's been successful at this, but they had applied for a HRSA follow-up to extend that. I haven't heard anything's been said and come back on that. So I know that she had found enough to find it promising to try and continue the project. So I'm sure she'd be available, be happy to join us. I'll take it.
I think some of this might be presented at the Mosaic Conference this week, too.
Yes.
So
okay.
Hear about it. And you know, we have that portal project, which one side of the portal is a common application system that our West Texas Nursing Education Consortium schools are in, and the second side is a retention portal. And we're collecting quite a bit of data in that retention portal. One thing that we've noted is the same with the schools within our consortium, which there are 12. The schools within our consortium that said that they needed the help the most are the schools that access it the least. And I think it's the whole, you're so overwhelmed that you pull back and don't. What you were saying about the student is the same with the faculty. So, but we do have a lot of data there that will be shared next week.
We really gave up trying to wait for them, so we require students to come with our retention specialists.
We have this portal.
Oh, for the portal.
All kinds of retention strategies and software and stuff to help the faculty.
But they don't access it.
Require them.
Yeah, require the faculty also.
It's not my school. It's that 12 schools.
Well, Pat, convince them all. They have to require it. Do you want your paycheck? You got to go on there.
But Leanne, that's interesting. So that's
They'll
probably
retire in droves.
we may need to do is look at the issue of what are the success characteristics. We know for ours, for example, we do require it. And that may be, we believe it is one of the reasons our numbers are as high as they are at UT Arlington, is because if you score below a certain level, you must take a special course and work with a student success coordinator. So those are the kinds of things that as we tease out what's true amongst this group that may be different among others, we can maybe get a better handle out of what is not just one school's experience, but the common characteristics.
Right, because they're so overwhelmed, I think. You know, if you have 8 hours in a day, one of the hours is not going to be to go to the retention specialist because you've got to take your kid to the dentist and, you know, go to the soccer game and all those kinds of things that these people are involved in with their lives.
Unless you're taking a course, and then you will because
Right,
you have
because
to.
you have to.
Because you have to pass that course.
Right.
Helen Erickson has a great term for this called conservative withdrawal, and I think that's a wonderful label for what we see with that.
Good.
I'm just curious, I don't know if I can do a sidebar, but when you require this, what kind of penalty occurs if they don't do it? Or do you have no issues with that?
For us, they can't take the next test.
They can't take the next test.
They do a course. We have remediation within the course. So if they get below a 70 in one test, then they must go to the retention specialist to prepare for the next test. If they don't go, they can't take the test.
Okay.
So we've never had any problems with anybody who didn't go.
Okay.
You know, you're validating something that I have felt like has worked for me clinically for years now. And I'm just amazed hearing it from different places. And that my clinical students, that's exactly what I've done. I follow their test results. If they're not making it, I require them to go to the counseling session center and get some study help, skills about test taking and that. And every student that has done that has been able to pull up and be successful. And it's been identifying where they are lacking in those essential skills. The best practice, we need to really get that out there.
And it really is not a punishment. And I don't think students...
They feel like it is.
Right. Well, in the long run, they don't, though. At first, they do feel like it is, and on any given day, they might feel like it is because of their overwhelming other responsibilities. But I think after they graduate and as they see themselves being successful, then it's like, well, maybe this really was something that was good.
Student success coordinator becomes their friend.
Yes.
And they see them as one of the greatest assets available. So.
Have you completed your portion?
Yeah.
Eileen, would you like to go ahead and give your report, or do you want to do this after lunch?
Whatever's your pleasure.
Let's go ahead and do your report then.
That sounds fine. I pass these out here, and those in the audience, I'm sure there's copies. There's enough here. They just flew in, so I don't have them. Well, we had I think a productive conference call as a follow-up to our work we started in the fall.
and I've listed for you our members, and several of them are here, are on the actual subcommittee, and I'd like to recognize Pat Allen. She's been very helpful, and Mary Beth Thomas is also ACORN members, and Joyce, who is not here today. We did lose one of our members, had to resign, Cheryl Mueller from Amarillo College, so we decided to wait to appoint somebody new until after the new makeup of the ACORN body was established, and so that way we would know if there was any new ACORN member that wanted to be on the committee. We do need an ADN representative then. We did an electronic survey, and I thank Pat and some of the technology at Texas Tech for that. Did a SurveyMonkey survey and had a really good result. We felt 242 deans and directors and faculty. I don't know that we really know what combination those ends are, what percentage came from each group, but at least that was about 22% response rate, which is fairly good for an online survey out of an estimated potential 1,200 nurse educators in Texas. What we were looking at is really trying to follow up on our charges of what should we be identifying as areas of distinction, and trying to get just some buy-in from people, realizing what's going on and having some input. That 93.1% supported our definition that we gave to you last time. When we looked at the comments, though, one word came out kind of several times. We thought it was worthwhile putting it into the definition, and so we added meritorious, and the new definition there that we're recommending to ACORN to be used with the title of Texas Nursing Education Program of Distinction is a noteworthy meritorious level of achievement in a performance area. Then the rest of the survey results, we asked what would be their top 4 characteristics of excellence, and the top ones came out: high student outcomes, and you can see the percentage of respondents there, student-centered, interactive, innovative programs. Third was faculty who demonstrate outstanding teaching, and fourth was evidence-based programs and teaching evaluation. We also asked about what benchmarks or measurements of distinction we should use, and that's clustered around first graduation rates above 85. Now you have to realize some of this was we gave them choices, so it wasn't really a forced choice. They could add options, but we did give some choices, so that 85% was an option that was given to them. Second was first-time pass rates of 80% or higher, and third was innovation. It didn't really identify how to measure that yet, and fourth was annual pass rates. So really 2 and 4 are very similar there. I think you can collapse those together. Next was areas of distinction, to identify what should we target as our first areas to really make sure we roll that out and develop criteria and measurement for that. And retention rates came in the highest. This was more of a diverse clustering. Teaching second, innovation third, and graduation rates 4. So we recommend combining the retention and graduation rates into one category, since they're really the flip side of the same coin. Third, we talked about the application process and the form related to the Senate bill that stipulates about recognizing programs that have achieved an 85% graduation rate and an 85% pass rate on NCLEX, and we've had a little subcommittee work on that, and but they have really not quite had the time to do it, so I appreciate it, Chris, kind of lending a helping hand there and saying that staff will come up with a draft and then have our subcommittee look at that, because I know you want to roll that out pretty soon. So one of our other charges is looking at student-friendly clinical agency designation, and a subcommittee of that group worked on what that should be, and this is really to help probably motivate and entice clinical agencies to really be partners with us by giving them some kind of a designation. One feedback I heard from someone said, we really that might be more damaging than it may be positive. So I think we have to look at that because of agencies being so competitive, and we would have to make sure our criteria for this is really what we want, so it's not just something that seems competitive, that the ultimate outcome is helpful to our students. And so this listing here, I think, is really a good start that our subcommittee came up with. Joyce led the charge on that, and so you might look at some of the things they're identifying, and we're certainly open for additional characteristics that you have. So I may stop here for a moment and give us some time to look at these and see what additional factors you have.
Well, earlier, Eileen, while you were in the air, we talked about the feedback from some of the data that's collected by the hospitals now in their, I'm calling them orientation programs. They probably have a fancier, more modern residency. Yeah. Maybe the sharing of data from the clinical facility to the nursing programs would be another one to add.
I mean, how their graduates do in those residency programs.
Yes.
I think that's right. I know we got some data recently from one of our healthcare systems, because they do track it by program, the Del Buenos tests that they give out, and they were saying our graduates did better than the national average, and it was just kind of reinforcing on the quality, so that would be good.
And another thing that I might suggest is, since I think we have pipeline issues in terms of nursing education as well, their openness not just to post-secondary, but secondary schools might be another element, how they work with them in rotations. Like letting high schools come on and how they work with them and guidelines they have for their
One of the things we found regarding that, though, is actually they take clinical spaces away from us, the nursing students.
That's an area of controversy.
We share nicely in Central Texas and have it in our system.
Maybe you have more agencies. But
yeah, I think that is an area in schools that maybe the deans in the Central Texas area may not have that same perspective.
Space is tight, but I think that the recognition is also that we won't have an endless supply of high school students with interest in health careers if folks aren't allowed to come in and
Well, I think part of the difficulty sometimes is high school students have taken places that then did not allow nursing students to go into, and students that were already in the program needed those experiences. And because high school students were there, I have that very problem right now in the operating room, which is a big problem.
Maybe we should be looking at experiences that don't take it away.
Well, it's part of it's a utilization issue. That because we have a system that sort of allocates spaces to the nursing programs, the high schools then fit into what is available.
And maybe the hospital's innovative scheduling, allowing appropriate...
a scheduling system that accommodates maximum utilization or something.
Well, and Anna, this is Mary Beth, isn't that what you found out, that since you've gotten this database, all of these opportunities were there that they didn't even know about? And so there's all these more sites now because they looked at the whole big picture.
And better understanding. I think some of it, we had dare I say, a protectionist point of view on the part of every single participant in the system. Anyone who had already come in was concerned about any increase in capacity and any change to how facilities were used, and a real concern about how we brought new facilities on board and who got dibs on them first, that kind of thing. But what we found is we really don't have the number of conflicts we anticipated, that there's better understanding on the hospital and facility part about what different rotations demand in terms of the educational needs of the students. So instead of, let's say Round Rock feeling hurt that they weren't getting the level 4 RN students, they now understand that those students might not get the experience that they wanted for the level 4 students, or vice versa. They might be able to say back to the system, actually, you're not familiar with what's going on in my unit anymore because things change, and so I can accommodate your students. So as we've worked through a lot of that communication and coordination, I think we've raised, I'm uncomfortable with saying, have we increased capacity? I'm not sure about that, but we've definitely improved utilization.
Well, and maybe that's what we want to say, that this hospital demonstrates increased utilization of all their available clinical sites for student experiences, not just nursing student, but all student experiences.
This is Beth, and I think that's the element. It's not whether or not we bring somebody new into a mix or expand an existing participant in the mix. It's whether or not it's net new.
Yeah.
And if it's net new production, then that's describing an innovation, a willingness, a conversation, a relationship that probably operationally reflects meritorious distinction. Is that kind of where you were going? But I'd like to see us, particularly as we look at new providers coming into the area, and rather than getting into that protectionist view, as Anna so carefully chose her words, ever the jurist.
So not careful.
I think it's all about adding to and being in addition, as opposed to one out, one in,
right.
A win-lose.
And that would be the distinction for the facility who's able to do all that innovative scheduling.
And this is Don. I have 3 more quick things to add. Under hospital-sponsored scholarships, I would add and tuition reimbursement.
Oh, yes, that's good.
And advancement.
For advancement?
And advancement, because there's a discussion, about whether for some students being able to get tuition advancement, since they don't necessarily have the funds up front to
that's a
advance
very
them,
good point.
versus reimbursement once they've spent the money on the class. We've certainly been, we're not there yet, but that's been an issue that we've been hoping to.
Good.
I thought you meant academic advancement or professional advancement.
That's also
you meant
cool.
financial.
Financial advancement. That's just another tuition kind of
and then
paying up front.
Another one that I don't see that's the more obvious is providing preceptors and or faculty.
Joint faculty appointments.
Faculty and preceptors.
Joint faculty appointments, I think, is what that means there. But it doesn't really say preceptor part. And clinical instructors that the board allows us to have.
The only other thing I was thinking of is the opportunity for employees in a work-study type of approach that we're looking at some of our plans. Whether that might be not a requirement, but certainly a
descriptor of a
way to make things student-friendly.
A work study for the students.
Traineeship, paid.
Flexible scheduling for students, the working students.
Can you think of anything, Deborah?
What I was thinking from my standpoint is going in and teaching clinical in areas. I mean, you actively start looking for areas that are student-friendly like that. And so you've put on paper what I have thought about for years. And one of the things that happens is true. The department manager says, welcome to the students. The staff there has some idea that the students are going to be there that day. I've shown up before and they had no idea we were going to be there for clinical. Puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage with a stressed staff already. And then some hospitals have given me access to like RT coming, the IV team, or pharmacy coming down. I mean, for a student, 30 minutes talking to somebody else like that makes a huge difference in their experience in a hospital. That they get an orientation. This is what the IV pump is. This is what the central lines are. That kind of thing. And so the hospitals that I work with, I always ask them, do you have somebody to send down? It makes, and hospitals, if they're smart about this, need to realize those students go back and go to work there. That has happened to me over and over and over again during the years. The more friendly that clinical area is, they beat a hot path right back there when they graduate.
and they want to go to work on that unit because they feel like they're going to be welcomed, and people are going to help them, and they're going to learn there. It's a huge recruitment tool that goes along with this. So, and there's a lot of pieces that really get them secondary gain out of that. The only other thing I thought about is when you were talking about the high school students, who better to recruit them than the nursing students? The high school students, they're in the same age ranges a lot of times. And it almost feels like sometimes if we could partner them up with some of our students that are truly exceptional students and articulate and able to mentor the high school students, bring them along with clinical at that point with the senior students that are in management or whatever. Let them shadow those folks. So we're going to have to share the resources, that's for sure, but just get a little more creative about it rather than fighting over who's going to be where.
And we do a nifty thing each year where we bring our local nursing students together with people from the students from the health science technology programs who have applied for the day, do simulation with them, stuff about financial aid, and the interaction between the different levels of the high school students and the nursing students is a joy to watch. And we get everyone from, and sometimes we recruit their mothers and their fathers as well as the students into nursing because, you know, they meet some of our capital idea people who've been through some knocks and had some kids and come back to school, and I love that day. It's my favorite day. My job.
We do something, this is Eileen, we do something like that with, we call it Nightingale Experience, and it's 2 days, and they stay overnight in the dorm, and then our students are their counselors, and we have I love it. We have 2 high school students with one of our college students, and the college students have to apply to be one of the counselor, the group leaders, and it's really cute. They come up with we have the femur group and the brain group, and they wear colored bandanas so we keep them all organized and stuff. But it's a great experience. We use simulation, and they actually go to 2 hospitals, and the nurses there do kind of more simulations, and it's been a great experience. And we followed them for a year afterwards, and at a year, 95% said they wanted to go into health care. 94% they said they wanted to go into nursing. So that was exciting.
We love that we switched about 7 kids last year from going to medical school to
Exactly.
nursing.
That happens to us too. Exactly. A lot of them come in the morning wanting to be doctors. They just don't realize nurses can do so much.
More.
The shadowing piece, is that something like just to allow opportunity for that? Should we is that something you'd like to see here? Anything else?
I think we kind of covered it, but I put participating in a regional clinical space utilization effort or data collection, or it may be mandated anyway if one of these bills passes, but regionally I know that some parts of the states are really far ahead of others as far as looking at space utilization.
You have to be careful what you ask this group, or they'll really tell you.
Well, that's what we want. We'll have to figure out how many of these do they have to meet in order to get that designation, that distinction.
May I make a suggestion? I worked on something like this in another organization. What we did is we divided them into quadrants and required a certain number of points in each quadrant so that it wasn't heavily weighted, and that people could kind of, target, I'm going to get 3 out of 5 in this current quadrant. That kind of helped out a little bit.
What about the idea of maybe we shouldn't go down this track? Is that, I just want to explore that so we have an informed decision.
I think one of the important things that this brings up for me, and when I initially looked at this, I'll tell you I had a negative experience. What I thought was, here's my profession, and I'm having to teach them how to socialize with other people. Because really, when you think about it in any other business, when they're actually actively recruiting and trying to get people involved, they actually do things like this.
In the legal profession, the American Bar Association actually rolled out a program years ago to be student friendly, basically. Explaining them, that's actually where some of my background comes from, how to get more women, to be successful in the profession and all that kind of stuff. People do need to be taught how to.
Okay, now hold up here. Don't go so far down.
The lawyers.
But maybe that is what we need to do then. Maybe we assume that people really know how to do this. And in the whole of the day for a nurse manager, I mean, the fact that I showed up with students may be the least crisis that manager has to deal with in that whole day. So if you do make it more set up that way, I think it's going to make a huge difference.
Okay.
There are always unintended consequences of anything that you do. However, I would think that if I had a hospital next to another big hospital, and that one big hospital was all of a sudden student-friendly and had a program going, I might jump on the bandwagon and kind of do that too, and I think we're all going to benefit for it. I can't see a downside.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you. If you have other flashes of insight that you want to share later, just let me know. Next, we were talking about a clearinghouse model as one of our charges to try to look at how can we disseminate things and have a central location for that. And some of the things that we thought about putting on there was best education practices, so data that we find from our different surveys and things. Also looking at practices that the ACORN, so it might be the retention committee, what they have identified or for many of the groups, and then also linking them to other nursing education resources. And Elizabeth was checking into that, if that's a possibility here. I don't know if you're ready to
Actually,
okay.
We have already got plans to have some of that.
So we could maybe
yeah.
we were trying to find what was the best home for this, so that
I think even possibly having both sites.
Yeah, and then we would also have maybe one to the Board of Nursing, and then maybe you could have one to us, and so.
But you would link it or something.
We're already linked with the database that or the site that Jason created for you all. We've got mutual links back and forth, so we've got a whole section now, innovation, on our website. But we, particularly in the Texas team too, have talked about being a repository. So.
And so, you're having plans of expanding that? Is that it? So we could work with you all, and so I'll work with Elizabeth. So it's great you're both on the committee, so you can help us with that. Okay, and then looking at increase in our number of nationally accredited professional nursing programs, talking with Mary Beth there, at that point, I guess on the list you had was 92 programs. I read somewhere else there were 94. So, but
it goes up and down a lot.
Yeah, but I think we'll go with 92 here. And 14 of those are not nationally accredited. All of them except one of those are associate programs. So a couple of suggestions was one, assessing the reasons why those 14 programs aren't accredited. Just a little mini survey I did in our area for the ones that weren't accredited, and they said financial reasons was the biggest reason. But I thought we probably should actually try to find out from those 14 programs. And then wondering about communicating that the coordinating board maybe, or the ACORN committee would communicate with deans and directors about recommending that, and then those would be letters they could share with college presidents, or I'm not sure exactly we wanted to follow the correct political structure in doing this, because there will be fiscal issues involved with it. So input that you have on that we're open to.
Eileen, let me just make sure I understand that sentence. That second sentence says all of the 14 ADN programs but one are nationally accredited.
I'm sorry.
Do you mean of the 14 programs that are not accredited, all but one
are ADN?
Are ADN.
Sorry. I was doing this at 11 o'clock last night.
I just want
You're right. Absolutely. It's worded wrong. Yeah, all of the 14 programs were ADNs but one.
So there's 13 ADN and one BSN programs that are not accredited. accredited nationally.
I was just thinking there was more than 14 ADN programs out of the 92. I was confused.
Yeah, that sentence is totally messed up. I will send you a corrected version. So does that sound like a reasonable thing? I think that sounds okay. Mm-hmm. And then we talked briefly about Team Texas report because there are implications for our committee, and especially about collecting practices, best practices regarding retention and graduation. And what we were thinking was that the data that would come from the application that programs have to fill out to get that special designation that's a result of that regulation, those were the data we really would be needing. So we didn't see surveying them in addition. We thought that we would get those data from that application process if we set it up to really collect as much measurement pieces as we can. Does that sound agreeable? Probably some of it depends on how that application actually turns out, but
we are going to ask for quantitative data.
Since that was your intent, we thought it could be designed to accomplish collecting those best practices in a detailed enough manner that other programs could benefit from that knowledge. I can't imagine any program that has 85% graduation rate and 85% passing rate would not apply. I mean, that would be the only thing a survey would get everybody, but I can't quite imagine a program not applying for that. So if there's more Team Texas things that we will need to do later, we are certainly open for that, but that was the one that I saw in there that I thought we needed to address. And then based on the survey results that I talked about a little bit earlier, we're identifying on number 8 here these 3 areas that we're going to start identifying the benchmarks or criteria. And so what would a program have to do to apply for distinction in this area, in those 3 areas? And our next meeting we have scheduled for June 23rd, and the teams working on those 3 areas are going to report back at that time. And Elizabeth's going to report back on the clearinghouse piece. The one thing that as I was reading the minutes for this meeting, I saw we discussed a lot about survey in schools about IOM in our last meeting. And we did not choose to do that to combine. First we talked about combining it with the study or the survey we were doing about finding about excellence and benchmarks and that sort of thing. We just thought the longer you make it, the less participation you have, and we thought it might be confusing because it's really switching gears. I mean, really 2 different purposes. So I guess at this point I need to know, since some of that the curriculum model is on hold until we know what's happening with the legislature, I didn't know if you wanted us to wait to conduct that survey or to go ahead with it. Right.
I think we were looking at it in relationship also with the research committee. Didn't you sort of pass it on to research, and we discussed it at the research committee, and Sharon Cannon was going to pursue the advisory council's report and how it might relate and be helpful.
Well, that's great. I thought there was something about, but in the minutes I didn't quite see that connection was in there.
A broader question. We have so many things we're asking. We have so many best practices we're collecting. We've used the term creating a clearinghouse or a website for numerous things we're doing. And I guess it brings up the broader question of how do we make sure, to your point of, it can't be something that's going to take 3 hours for people to collect. How do we coordinate in a way that makes this efficient as well as effective? And then we don't have things scattered everywhere. We can link everybody together, but how do we make sure there's kind of a one place to go to get this? I really don't care where, but I think we got to make it easy. Simple, transparent. If you want best practices on graduation or, retention, something.
The larger you get a group, an amount of information like that, you have to start thinking about knowledge management.
Yeah, thinking it in that way. And that's when you get into putting it in an archive system so you can actually do word searches and get, I mean, if you're talking about volumes and volumes of information that we're collecting. So it has to be kind of a strategic plan for, we've got a website with these big categories, we've got a way to search that website, and there's a whole technology piece behind that that has to go in there.
And depending on what we're going to do with the data, how do we collect it in a consistent way? Do we do... I'm of two minds. One is I hate doing long surveys. On the other hand, I hate doing surveys. So better to give me fewer, and I'll gut my way through and get it done. One person's opinion. But is there a way to... how do we want to approach this? Because I think I heard at least 3, if not 4 today, surveys that we want to do. And that doesn't add on to whatever the heck the board is going to do. And we're surveying the same people, so we're going to get an extinguishing effect in getting returns. How do we, and maybe that's something to contemplate over lunch, but whatever, how do we get there?
Well, maybe since the board is already doing that, would that be publicly reported at that point, Mary Beth? I don't know. Your surveys? Most of your survey results are open. Maybe we should think about just trying to piggyback onto their efforts, or not replicate what they're already collecting.
I'm not sure we are necessarily, are we?
No, I'm not sure we're replicating, but we are doing multiple surveys, and maybe we all come together and say, by this date, we submit all the research questions into a central pool. And we find a way. So that way, at least all I fill out is one set of demographics about me as a school or as an employer. I do it once. And then I answer the whole set of questions, and I'm done. That would be one strategy. I don't know. But I just am struck by your point that said, well, who's doing this piece of the IOM? Well, we're doing the IOM, and we're doing the advisory board, and we've got the DELCES, and then we were talking about the collecting the best practices associated with 8585. We'll spend a lot of time and energy. Can we do it more efficiently?
Well, I think one of the advantages, like you said, was having all the questions is we can, demographic data would be once rather than doing it each time, or whatever demographic kind of data we would have. And we can certainly do sections, and so group things more logically. That I think helps. Part of it is making it a logical flow.
And then we may be having some groups that are same and some groups that are not the same.
How do you mean?
Well,
who the sample group is?
We may be asking schools some questions and clinical facilities other questions.
Right. Clearly they would have to.
Yeah. So we would at least have 2 basic surveys, because I'm assuming that the perspective and the questions would be worded just a little bit differently, depending on whether it was a school or a clinical agency.
Right.
So I think maybe that's right. Maybe that's one of the things over lunch we can mull over. Are there any other comments or questions regarding Eileen's report on her Excellence Committee?
It was a meritorious
distinction. Thank you. It was a good group to work with.
I think later on there will be some discussion about common curriculum, as well as I think you were going to ask Mary Beth to give an update on the DELCES, so there might be some discussion then about whether or not there'd be a need to further evaluate the use of IOM competencies. And if so, how that's different from the data that was collected in the past by the consultant.
Since we voted on the other report, so I will entertain a motion to accept the Excellence Committee's report.
This is Barbara. I so move.
Second.
This is Beth. I second.
Okay. If you agree, please report yes as I call your name. Peggy Allen.
Yes.
Patricia Allen.
Yes.
Barbara Cordell.
Yes.
Eileen Curl.
Yes.
Regina Johnson.
Yes.
Josefina Lujan. I remain ever optimistic. Jeff Mancini.
Yes.
Anna Mejia Dici.
Yes.
Deborah Simmons?
Yes.
Mary Beth Thomas?
Yes.
All are in favor. We accept your wonderful report. Thank you very much.
And I will send a corrected version to Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are now going to take a 30-minute lunch break, during which we have several items that we will informally discuss and may take action later. So those of you that are listening by phone, you're welcome to come back in about 20 minutes after we've had a chance to eat a little bit, and we'll have a little bit of informal discussion and then move on to our next agenda item. Ready to start some informal discussion off of our agenda. I have a little list of things.
Not listening. You can't. No, Excelsior. That's about the employees and the. Correct.
There were about 3 things that we wanted to talk about a little more informally, and we just wanted to have a short discussion on legislative update, basically from all of us that are on the committee, because I think some people know about some areas and other people know about other areas. I think we all know that the Excelsior School has found a sponsor for their bill, so that bill has been filed. I don't know if it has been. Has it?
It's going to. The House version will be heard Tuesday.
In higher ed,
public
health.
Also, you know, TNA's bill that is to counter the Excelsior bill is being heard on Tuesday too.
In public
health. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
do we need to?
Excelsior's bill is Senate bill, just so people know their numbers.
Yes, so we can.
Senate bill, I have 1397, and Representative Pitt's bill is, with their companion bills, House bill. Oh gosh, I got too many
It's
numbers here.
3230.
Okay.
3230.
Yeah.
Who sponsored in the Senate?
Dr. Duell, a physician.
And then, I'm just because I got the numbers right here, Representative Howard has the alternate TNA bill, which asks for a study. That's House Bill 435. I think there's another number on here.
4355.
4355, yes. Okay.
Now, there's 2 Donna Howard bills.
Oh.
The one was the earliest one, which I don't think, is Cindy here? The one is the early bill that I don't think they're going to go forward with, but the later bill is the big study bill. And what's the number on is that the later bill?
4355?
Yeah, 4355.
1738?
The early one. But that's not going anywhere by Donna Howard.
Representative Howard's bill, I think, is being heard Tuesday, too.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
In public health.
Right.
So it's possible to watch those proceedings if you go to the House of Representatives or to the House or the Senate.
If you so
I was going to say, can we do something more than watch those, possibly out of this committee?
I don't think this committee can, but I certainly think that individuals could and should feel free to contact members of the Public Health House Committee and express their concern. This committee is a part of a state agency, and therefore we cannot take a stand.
Susan King, who you know as a nurse, is on public health. So,
and how do you have any sense of her?
Yes, I think she. Well,
this is.
I get the impression that she does not support the Excelsior bill, but I don't know that for sure.
Right.
The other bill, and I'm sorry I did not bring my numbers.
It's okay.
Is by Representative Martinez, which calls for the board would not be able to allow compilation of the pass rates until after the 3rd time. after the student takes it
taken it
three times. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's...
Oh, for what reason?
Yeah. Representative Martinez believes that'll increase their pass rates. He has 2 programs in his district, 2 VN proprietary programs who have low pass rates, and he believes that'll help their pass rates. We actually, from the information we had, we looked at his 2 schools and looked up the students and factored them in to do, they'd only taken it twice, not 3 times. And it did not bring up the pass rates. Mm-hmm. So that bill will be heard on Tuesday also.
But that will affect all schools of nursing,
mm-hmm.
regardless of type?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, and I can get you that bill number if you want it.
You know, I can't help but feel like we're getting diluted as our professional worth is getting diluted when these things happen, and understanding that. One of the last errors that I looked at was new grads, 2 of them working on a unit together without, and these are new people. I mean, we all know that there's not that many experienced nurses on the units, and they pulled up 70 units of regular insulin and gave it to a patient. And the reason that they did is they didn't have any experience with insulin, and they didn't have any experience with the type of syringes, which is a common error to make mix-ups between those. But it brings to mind, again, the value of clinical mentorship and the value of getting in the clinical areas where someone can help you stepwise through these critical decisions, and have the thought that if you don't know, you go looking for someone who's got more experience. I don't think you get that in didactic education. I think you get that when you're out on the unit actually having to deal with critical situations. And it really frightens me that these things are in front of us. I guess both is the nursing professions, the way the public looks at us and what we bring to the patient's bedside. And then again, with the idea that there is such variation between nursing programs now that something like this could easily be slipped in because we don't have that set standard that says you have to have this.
Well, I'm curious to know from your perspective, what are the costs to you in assuming that a student who graduates from a program where there is no clinical instruction, what greater cost would you incur in anticipating getting to them to the point where they can be a fully autonomous nurse versus, say, one that's come in with the clinical instruction? Where do you see the differences, and how can you potentially quantify that if it can be quantified?
I would fall back on my more astute colleagues to come up with a quantifiable number there, but I will give you an analogy.
Okay.
And that is, if we are having discussions right now about the difference between industry's expectations of our graduates from our programs as they stand today, with this much clinical instruction already in those programs, can you kind of think about the difference between someone who doesn't have that clinical and experience in a program and now goes to industry? You know, the hospitals, while I understand on one hand logic would say I just need more numbers of nurses, you know, throwing bodies at them without that clinical expertise doesn't follow logically. And actually the hospitals will incur, you know, if they are aware of it or not, they're going to incur more costs bringing those people up to speed in orientation programs and such. The unfortunate part about this from a safety standpoint is this. We don't detect errors in this industry. We've proven that. All the way through all of the error reporting programs, the IOM reports, we don't have good detection rates. We do know from some of the retrospective studies that we have high rates of errors in this industry. So we're now adding even more inexperienced and perhaps less clinically experienced, less experienced people into a system that we've already got flaws in. You know, I can't see that that's going to make a difference. I was making a joke earlier, but I think it works. If you got on an airplane and heard that the pilot was welcoming you because they were very glad to have their first real flight, that they had passed everything in their clinic, in their simulations, and they've got all A's and passed their board exam, but they've never really taken off a runway. This is what we're talking about. If I go to, and I spend a lot of time at the nuclear power plant these days, if I go there, they have an entire simulation lab where they throw those people every 5 weeks into training for critical incidents. Every 5 weeks. They would no more think of putting someone in a control room that didn't have real experience next to a mentor than they would ever do anything. So why do we accept that? I wouldn't accept my physician that got no clinical in a program and then just ended up in practice and maybe practicing with somebody experienced, maybe
But isn't
not.
he safe? Wouldn't that physician, he or she, be safe for that nuclear regulator if they passed their written exam? They were licensed. That's the comeback
There you go.
get.
Yeah.
You're right.
That's the comeback.
You're right.
But the other issue is that they're basically transition programs. So
Yeah.
maybe someone can speak to that effectively. If you have, in the best case scenario, an LVN who's transitioning to RN, what skills do they new skills do they need, and do they need the clinical instruction to grasp those in a way that is helpful to the hospital, or is once again a burden based on the lack of
Eileen and I were just talking about that very issue. LVN students are the weakest students that we have. They have the most difficulty. They have the most problem with medication errors. They have the most problem with calculations.
This is Barbara. We did away with our LVN transition program because
For that
of that
reason.
Because they could not
They can't do it.
make
They
it.
can't make
so
the
we
leap.
almost have to start them over to get them to think like an RN. It just wasn't working.
How long ago did you do that?
About 2 years ago, we stopped the LVN transition. We had a 100% failure rate.
Yeah, the other argument I've heard
They
is that
failed out of school because they weren't. That transition wasn't enough to get them up to speed to mesh in with the RN group.
healthcare is getting more complex. I mean, we're talking about volumes of information management now. When I started off, I had 10 medication cards in my pocket, and I memorized all those, and it was fine. The U.S. formulary alone of medications right now is well over 60,000 drugs in the U.S. 60,000. So unless you've got somebody who is taught how to information seek and make decisions, you are not going to have someone who could administer drugs safely.
And I think this is why the question, the alternative bill, Representative Howard's bill, is to ask under what conditions could this be safe. They do know we've been graduating 250 to 300 Excelsior students per year in the state of Texas. So this is not that it's something new coming in. And at this point, the question is under what set of condition, if any, can this happen and go forward? What are the issues around clinical competencies, assessment, the ability to effectively and comprehensively evaluate in an exit exam versus a day and a half or 2 days of simulation? They do half a day of simulation looking at 3 skills: Foley catheterization, sterile dressing technique, and IV start. And that may be adequate. What we don't know is we don't know. And I guess
we
that's
also don't know that the historical precedent was actually adding safety to patients in Texas.
Absolutely agree.
Which
Absolutely
also calls for
agree.
a study.
And I think that's the question. How do we get to the point where we're responding to these questions from evidence as opposed to gestalt? My gestalt is role is important and role is not learned didactically. And if you come in based on another educational discipline, respiratory therapy, LVN, physician, that does not mean you know the role of a registered nurse. Even though I may know all the content, I don't know the application. So I absolutely think there's something very important that occurs in clinical, but we do not have the evidence to say that 90 hours of clinical in one is worth is exactly the number of hours of clinical we need. Does one need OB?
Well, everybody else is going to be tested on OB, and if you've never touched a fundus and you get a license, you can go out there and you have no idea what you're doing.
Right. So
because nobody's ever evaluated that.
That's the important part of doing the study, and hopefully those who feel strongly...
Somebody is saying yes, yes, yes.
OR is the same issue. Operating room specializations. That all being true, I think the question that came up was, can we speak as an organization? And I understand we can't. That's considered lobbying, not informing. But as individuals, where there is the passion and an understanding, and particularly as it comes from the patient safety perspective that you so eloquently articulated just now, I think those are the things that the legislators need to hear. And, of course, scares me when these sorts of regulatory issues are being addressed as public policy through a legislative approach. That's another issue of a discipline controlling itself for the safety of the organization.
I just wanted to make it clear that the board has never felt like NCLEX was the only part of competency. And that's why we do require supervised clinical learning experiences. And speak to your issue, we're not exactly sure what is enough. We have left that, except for VN programs, which is more prescribed, but with the professional programs, we have left that to the individual schools to sort that out. And so I think, finding out what's the right amount is something we do need to look at. But we have never claimed that just passing the NCLEX was enough.
And in reality, it's something you said, both of you said earlier, made so much sense. You were talking about that student that failed a test, and then you put them back in this program, and then they do well. In reality, you've got the whole continuum with your students. There are students that you probably don't need as many clinical hours, but the problem is you've got to decrease variation in our programs, so you've got a minimum standard. Then you're going to have a way to flex back and forth. The students that need more need to be able to get more. This idea of none of that in 2 hours does not give you the ability to see a student and see if they need that. I've had students that made perfect A's on all of their tests in their classroom and did great and went to clinical and absolutely fell down. Could not recognize someone in respiratory distress. They could tell you the textbook definition of it. They could give you all the etiologies, every reason why someone wouldn't be able to breathe. But when they saw it in front of them, it was another story. And that piece of it is getting lost in this. That knowledge piece is getting lost.
It's not that uncommon that students are doing very well in theory and fail clinical.
Yeah.
It is not that uncommon because the environment is so different now. And when Eileen and I were talking about the LVNs, we were not trying to intimate that they were inherently less intelligent, but they generally have so many issues that they come with when they come into the LVN program. They go through the program and they're successful, but those issues that they've been dealing with do not go away. And when they come into the ADN program, in the transition part, they can't make the type of time commitment simply because of all the issues that are going on with them. So many of them are single parents. They're living, an LVN salary is still not a great salary, and so they're certainly better off than when they were CNAs, but they're still struggling financially, especially if they're single parents. So it's very difficult for them to make the type of commitment that's necessary in a one-year transition program because they just have too many other things that are just bombarding them.
In addition to that, I think once they have identified with a certain role and that they'll be enrolled, that transition where they'll be enrolled, they're very used to calling the doctor, and they're not the one making the critical decision. And so we find that is really hard for them to take ownership of that and to process that. It's kind of like the identity with that first role is their foundation. It's kind of like people who you're CNA, and if you're not a very good one, it doesn't matter what kind of education you have in your next level, it's hard to break those bad habits that you
and move on to that next level.
But I think in summary, the question was, this is one bill that's coming forward, what do people want to do with it? But also, I would say for myself, although it is a challenge, the critical importance of keeping our minds open to the full array of possibilities. The question ultimately is not whether you can or you can't do anything. The question is, under what set of conditions can this be successful? Right. And success in our terms is reliably producing a registered professional nurse who can practice safely, ensure patient safety on an ongoing basis in a complex, increasingly so, environment. So I hope that as ACORN, we will continue to explore lots of options for different ways, innovative ways to make people successful, to bring more people into the profession, and to provide some help to the overall questions being asked in generating the evidence that says what are the best practices, what are the essential elements of what needs to be in place in order to ensure, because any good person can do well in almost any program we put them. Any poor person who is struggling is probably not going to be successful in anything. It's the group in the middle, like most things, that the structure and process really matters.
Perhaps as leaders in this community of education and nursing practice, you might consider individually supporting the TNA approach to this in some written manner so that they might take that to the testimony with them on Tuesday and make your voices heard if you're not going to be there yourself. I do know this, when you don't speak up about it, someone who has a louder voice will definitely be heard. And so we've really got to make a stand on this.
And you all are a lot of busy people, and letters are terrific. But to the extent that you can get someone of your level of eloquence testifying in front of a committee, it's extremely useful. Because stories...
Thank you all for that passionate discussion. A couple of other things. One of the things that we wanted to get some feedback from you all about is, as you know, we have some committee members whose terms end with this meeting, and we're going to be having new committee members appointed. How do you feel about the size of the committee? We have already increased the size with some new positions so that the full committee will be 2 new positions, so we'll have a total of how many? I shouldn't have asked that. I asked you because I didn't know.
I think it's 15.
I think it's 15 also. I think it's around 15. So we wanted a sense from all of you whether you think, Elizabeth is shaking her head, it's 15. If you think we should have even more members, if 15 is a nice round number, and we should increase our subcommittees and have more participation through subcommittee participation. So we'd just like for you to tell us what you think about that.
Would you speak, the 2 new positions are one service?
One health-related and one proprietary school. It's not a secret. We've received about 35 nominations, and so we have a lot of, from the looks of things, eager and qualified people to work with us. So we have, an option potentially to expand the program beyond our committee beyond what we had anticipated, or again, maybe we don't want to let these people go without at least asking them to serve in another manner in our activities. So we're interested in your opinion.
This is Beth, and my opinion is that we need to ensure we maintain diversity of thought. So adding a proprietary is important, adding a service perspective, strengthening that service, which then gives 2. That would be at least enough, if not more.
Is it another health-related institution?
Additional health-related, and yeah.
Do you mean health-related as in a health-related education?
Oh, excuse me, a health-related institution.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we're still saying we only have 1 service.
We have 2 service. We've always had 2 service. Ed left us, and we didn't replace him, but we do have 2 service.
Okay.
And Chris, it wasn't just proprietary, but it was private or proprietary.
Yes, that's correct.
private.
And I would speak to perhaps doing one of two things. We have ambitious goals that are not always top of mind for everybody as much as we're all committed to it. Having a few more people either on the committee or doing more expansion of the subcommittees with non-committee members to help us achieve those goals could be helpful. There will be much to do, I'm sure, in the next 2-year cycle.
Other comments about, do we want a bigger committee or more subcommittees?
Larger subcommittees.
Or both.
More members of the subcommittees.
Certainly, I think that if we were going to go with keeping the size of the committee plus the 2 people, we would want to make sure we issue an invitation to all these eager volunteers and strengthen our subcommittees. I mean, that would be a shame not to note their interest and include them.
So I don't sense that there's great feelings one way or the other, but we should somehow try and utilize this great volunteerism that has come forth in a meaningful way for the committee. Okay? Then the very last thing that wasn't on our agenda that we thought we would like to hear a little bit about was the ACE committee and DELCES and kind of where we are with that and when we can expect something to respond to.
I'm going to defer to Mary Beth because I was ill the last meeting and I wasn't able to attend. So.
We have our work group, and we have come up with the new competencies. And if you'll recall, the DELCE was set up with the competencies, and it was broken down under each competency into knowledge and skills and behaviors. And so our first step was looking at the competencies themselves. We realized that when these were done previously, the LVNs did not have a scope of practice. They do now. And we altered the VN competencies to reflect that they are now working with patients and their families, and that they are not limited to working in just a structured healthcare facility. That data came from the National Council in their practice analysis, which reflected that VNs are working with families and they are working out in the community. So the competencies will reflect that shift. It was interesting looking at the differences between the ADNs and the BSNs, and I think there was quite a bit of work to distinguish those two a little better. The competencies may not be as different as the actual going down into the knowledge, skills, and behaviors. The competencies are broad. The knowledge, skills, and behavior are more detailed. Of course, with the BSN, there was more of a focus on groups and large cohorts, public health. We also looked at reflecting in the competencies IOM language, and we specifically talked about instead of provider of care, we talk about provider of patient-specific the first IOM competency. Patient-centered care, right, and changing that to fit into that first competency. We added a whole new competency. This is a whole new competency on safety, which is, I think, terrific because that's what we're about. The other competencies we tweaked a bit in terms of there was one competency about healthcare collaborator or something, and we made that member of a healthcare team just like the IOM competency. So the committee approved a draft of the competencies. We have fine-tuned them better, and so they'll be looking at those. They're meeting Monday and Tuesday. And the staff have been working to help give them a template of the knowledge and the skills, kind of the meat of the competencies, if you will, is what I call it, the details. So they'll be looking at that, and they'll be busy for 2 days easily to go through those knowledge, skills, and behaviors. Now, we want a lot of buy-in, and this is what we talked about earlier. We want a lot of buy-in into this, and we want to make sure that when we send these out, we send them out to everybody, and we have a very good process for dialoguing and exchanging information. In the past, I believe they gave some of the education programs just part of the competencies so people didn't have to look at them all. I'm not quite sure about the past, but we want to make sure people really, and service providers also, look at these. So how we work to maybe meet some of the needs of the research committee and our needs, we'll talk about, and we'll look at that. And I believe I can say that we're on a timeline. We were on I know a real push because of the curriculum study, but it seems like we may have a little wiggle room. I'm not sure. We'll see. I don't think that's going to be a problem with the curriculum. I think these are broad enough, even with the detailed knowledge, skills, and behavior, to be able to make this work with the coordinating board curriculum study. But we want to make sure there's buy-in, and that may extend our timeline. We had hoped that we would get this in October board meeting. I think it's valuable enough for us to work collaboratively. If we need to extend that somewhat, maybe we do that. I don't know. We'll have to talk to the committee about that. But certainly there is willingness to collaborate. We need to be collaborating. There's a lot going on. So we'll look at that piece too. The other piece is, how do we better operationalize these? How can we help programs operationalize these better? We're going to be talking about that. Are there some methods we can use? Are there even technology somehow we can use with the DELCs to make them easier for programs to incorporate them into their curriculum? So that's a discussion we'll be having too.
How many practice representatives are on ACE?
Not enough.
Yeah.
Is that
it has been, quite frankly, it's been a little difficult getting them to come, and so we need practice in that now. And we've finally got one woman who's going to come from, I think she's a member of TONE, but we have got to have, I think, practice in.
Did you get a good return on practice or no? For this committee, for the position,
We have enough people to fill the
35
position.
nominees.
Oh, yes, of the 35 nominees, we did get people. Maybe. I just wonder if maybe some of them can cross over to. I think it's critical that we get more balance, more participation. The nature of the beast is we get service here and then they get called away. So you almost have to overpopulate the committee to ensure the voice. Wish it were different, but maybe that's something we could do.
You may be right.
Exactly. That's my personal local operating strategy. I triple up my the number of people and expect to get 1 out of 3.
The other area is to go into workforce. I mean, Anna, I think, has been a great member of this group, and she comes from what normally wouldn't be considered, a nursing background. Or,
and better not be considered a nursing background unless I guess I can go through nursing school. That clinicals that I'm on there.
Responsibilities.
You're good to go.
Workforce and offers a different perspective on nursing and the needs of, her community. So that's another option. We did not get anyone from workforce as a nominee, although we had solicited something, workforce or health affiliate, as a position. So we all of our nominees in that category came from hospitals. But we certainly would have liked to have had that perspective again, because I think it is valuable. So there's another way of looking at resources for these types of committee activities.
Mary Beth, this is Regina. I'm glad to see that you're emphasizing public health in the BSN competencies, because what I recommended to the public health faculty when I came to UT was that we take the B&E competencies and we also look at the public health competencies that we have. And what we did is we incorporated them into our course objectives.
Right.
And then from our course objectives, we developed methods, we developed strategies, ways to evaluate those objectives.
Right.
So that's how we work them into our
That's good.
into our curriculum. And it's really worked very well. We've been very, very effective. Another thing I want to know is, did you talk about leadership and management
Yes. Yeah.
in the BSN competency? Because there is a significant difference
Right.
between ADN and the BSN when it comes to leadership and management.
We did.
Is there some leadership management in ADN also now?
No.
No, there's none.
I think that's happening. I do think some programs haven't, but we didn't get a sense it was an essential competency.
I think you really need to have practice input on that.
Okay.
Because I think that is an expectation.
And again, I think it's the
Or maybe a
operational...
workforce reality.
It's the operational definition of leadership and management.
Exactly.
And I believe that a new graduate coming out is expected to be able to manage the team that they're working with. And so I think we need to clarify what they're asking for, as opposed to being able to manage databases in certain sorts of ways.
There's some leadership and management at the VM level.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So...
Yeah. Susie Sportsman really felt that, who's on ACE, felt like the BSNs were way too far-reaching, that the language in the BSN was much more for the
graduate
masters, the CNL.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's been some work to try and tone that down a bit.
Right. And then on the clinical side, the issue of assessments, where assessments were the prior iteration more on the BSN side, but clearly have to be on the ADN side as well. You expect them to be able to do early recognition and rescue. You have to have adequate assessment skills to do that. So there are, I think at least I can reflect what I've heard about the proceedings so far, is that there is an understanding of looking at the balance as a continuum of all things, clarify the operational definitions, as you say, and how do we describe what they are with adequate clarity that then we can figure out how to do something with them, as Regina just spoke to. And so are you recommending something, Mary Beth, that we can do to assure that this committee interacts at least at the level of surveying or sharing information back and forth? Is there some step we can take to do that? How would we make that real?
I was going to say, that's already built in. That really was the philosophy from the beginning, that we wanted to have it inclusive as opposed to exclusive. And so the committee is coming up with this draft, but then it will be sent out, as Mary Beth said, to all stakeholders that we can think of to have input, because it has to, as it says. If it's really going to serve a purpose, then we need to follow that kind of inclusive model, collaborative model. I would like to say, just adding about the membership of that committee, we did have a challenge finding somebody from the nurse executive level, but there are other representatives from non-academic settings, like the state health department is represented on that committee, and I believe there's home health or nursing home. I haven't looked at that list lately.
I think it was the nursing home group.
We tried to get some other stakeholders that were from the healthcare industry.
Okay, well, we appreciate that information very much, and we will look forward to the draft. Okay, we'll go back to our agenda, and I think we are ready for item 5, discussion of future committee activities in the context of the Texas Team Strategic Plan for the State of Texas to meet nursing workforce needs of 2013. And I believe we have a yellow handout for that. And Chris?
A few white sheets.
Oh, and a few white sheets that have been added. White and yellow.
On the insistence of Beth.
So Beth and Chris are going to lead our discussion in the Texas Team Plan.
I guess I'm going to assume that everyone's pretty much familiar with the origins of the Texas Team Plan and how we got to the document that has been, I think, universally distributed, and everyone, at least on the committee, has had a chance to read through my email of yesterday. And so I'm going to kind of jump in and talk about the next step, and then and just summarize what's in the plan again, maybe put it in the context a little bit with this committee, and see where your thoughts are and where we want to go. Do we want to kind of tweak our committee activities, or are the goals of the committee itself, subcommittees, to fit the strategic into the strategic plan in a way that provides the best support to the plan? I think, at least I can speak for Beth and myself, I think we're very much committed to its success, and of course all the activities of all the different committees in nursing in the state would benefit, from having a singular voice in some respects, and how we approach its success as well. So the first thing I wanted to share, on Beth's insistence, is the fact that a lot of the strategies that we're going to be discussing that are built into the plan are aligned around regionalization, which in essence means we have 94 programs in the state sometimes, and we have limited resources. So the idea is there's an alignment of nursing programs in regions, and that alignment will allow the nursing programs in these regions to share resources. If we were a state like Hawaii, we wouldn't have to have regions, but we are a large state, and oftentimes our identities are very much aligned with where we're located geographically. Sometimes it's different than geographically. Sometimes it's in cyberspace, but for the purposes of drawing regions, we thought it would be best to at least start with a geographic plan. So the sheet that I prepared, I printed off, was the Texas Team's proposal, just an initial proposal of what these regions would look like. And they're based on, they asked me to start the conversation by using a regional breakdown based on the infamous 2006 report that I've already quoted to you today, which was one where we were trying to distribute equal shares of work among 6 members of a committee to look at retention efforts. And so what we had was basically a reasonable distribution of programs across the state. Across regions, I should say. So that was the purpose. Now we've received feedback on these regions, and some people are proposing maybe a different spin on this. But overall, what we propose in many ways does align with current kind of consortium activities in these different parts of the state. And if you look at the map, it looks like West Texas is taking over the world. It is. If you look at the higher education regions, there are all kinds of regions in the state. We've actually collapsed 4 regions to make West Texas. And if you look at West Texas geographically, population-wise, you still don't have enough to even come close to the Metroplex in the Houston Galveston area. But again, it also captured a lot of the consortium building that's already going on there. Same with East Texas. That's the difference between the higher education regions And this particular map is that we have collapsed 2 East Texas regions into 1 region. So we have 6 regions. You know, it's not final yet. We have lots of good input. You know, we could be looking at it different ways. I know before we even got to this point, we looked at other types of regions, and it was just a matter of putting something out there for people to respond to. But if you look at the regions on the map and apply it to just general data, we do have a nice summary on the next sheet that shows the number of programs by these different regions, their percentage of initial licensure graduates with 2007 data, the general population of those regions, and the percentage of the population. So again, maybe the number of programs per region is too large, maybe it's too small, by some people's case, but we're certainly very much oriented towards feedback and doing the best we can in order to, again, ultimately share limited resources among different nursing programs. Any comments about that process so far? I think it's going to be very, very critical that everyone has some buy-in into this process in order for us to build on the strategies that are proposed in the Texas plan. Beth?
Well said.
Okay.
What I see might happen is that as we have had committees, subcommittees, and sub-subcommittees, then I see we will have regions, sub-regions, and little groups that are working together. And I think that is probably where the real work will be done, in the smaller groups that will identify themselves. And I could be wrong, but that's just my sense of what will really happen. And I think these regions work well because people, it is fairly well, you know, we can't make Houston smaller, so, you know, they're going to have a large population. Houston and Dallas just have got lots of people there. So, but I think that we will probably, especially for the massive geographical areas, I can't fathom that, you know, West Texas won't have some clusters of groups that are working together, and probably the same for South Texas and East Texas. But that's just what I think may happen.
But the notion that we move from talking about a single state to 6 regions is at least starting to aggregate into more manageable. But I would agree it's probably some even more finely granulated groupings than this, but it will give for the Higher Education Coordinating Board and for our recommendations something to make sure that we're spread across the state.
And I think that will also then give an identity to that region, even if they work in smaller groups, and they'll be able to come together at some point, but maybe can work independently in smaller groups over a long period of time and then come together and share things.
This is Eileen. I'm really glad to hear you say that, Leanne, because I see different scenarios based upon how we may share and make most effective use of what we have. I mean, if you're sharing faculty online, then the regions don't matter much. But as I try to picture, like we're in Southeast Texas, where we're 90 miles from the Houston area. We're a lot longer than that, up to Stephen F. Austin and that. So trying to share simulation centers with either of those 2 groups would be awful challenging. And we have a cohort in Southeast Texas that we've worked on with grants and that sort of thing that I think is a potential to work on more. So I was curious if there would be opportunity to like have a Southeast Texas cluster in either the East or part of Gulf Coast, whichever it may be. Part of the challenge that I have is which cluster, or which region would really I prefer to be in, because we're kind of on the cusp, so to speak, and we have agreements, contractual affiliation agreements with schools in that Gulf Coast region, but we are trying to establish some partnerships for higher education in higher up in the eastern part. So I don't know how fluid we can be based upon, depending on what the need is, that serving different needs for different schools. If there's can be flexibility built in for that, I think it would certainly make it more feasible for us.
And Chris, my understanding in the discussions about regionalization was not to say thou shalt not cross the borderline, but rather to encourage.
I don't want to be sent back to the swamp.
But rather to give people something more manageable to think about where there are. I know that some of the emails I've seen going back and forth where people say, yeah, I am on the cusp, but really I am over here, not over there. And some like yourself who say they go through both. I'm hoping that this will turn out to be a fairly permeable definition, but to assure that when we start looking for geographic representation, we can be looking we can be saying, we at least have to have somebody from the 6 in its broadest categories as a way to do it, or if there is an opportunity for a grant request to say we need to make sure that there's one in every region. It just makes it a little bit more manageable, would be why I've been strongly supportive of it. But my hope in bringing it back here was to get everybody's input as we move forward with bringing together, trying to create synergy between what ACORN and individual organizations and the large team plan are talking about.
I guess on a map it's pretty clear, like Midwestern would be in the west. I mean, schools can clearly identify what regions they're in.
Actually, I think you listed them. There was some document that went out that actually listed them as individuals.
We actually have the map with the schools, although they're little dots, and that is not terribly helpful. But in a pinch, this is the one I pulled just to give people a sense of what it looks like. And
yeah, I have to say I'm map challenged. I'm like, where's San Antonio? Is it on this side of the line or the other?
So it's south, right?
Yes.
San Antonio. Midwestern.
Lamar has come up as where do we put Lamar, and Midwestern the same. They have allegiances both in North Texas and in West Texas. So there's 2 examples of this. I wouldn't discourage anybody from suggesting both smaller regions if you think that's more workable either.
Sub-regions.
Because I think we're really open to looking at everything. It's just that we had to start the conversation, and this is how we did it.
Are you looking at a certain number of programs that have to be in a region to make it the most effective?
Region worthy?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good use of phrase.
No. Well, I mean more than one, I would think.
Yeah, right. But really, our Southeast Texas cluster, we're within 30 miles of each other.
You're like right in here, aren't you?
Yeah, we're right here. Mm-hmm. We go over to the Louisiana border. Mm-hmm. And so there's 3 programs there that work together a lot. But I don't know that that's a worthy number for a region.
Well, this is Barbara, and I guess it depends on what we're talking about, whether or not, I'm real excited about the regionalization and some of the things that can happen, like centralized application process. To me, that is going to be one of the best things that could happen to my college. We spend a lot of time and effort, and so do the other schools, and we have a lot of students that apply to 2 and 3, and they're spending a lot of time doing this application process, sending their transcripts. If we could centralize that, I think it would streamline it incredibly. But then the flip side of that is, if we're talking about regionalizing simulation centers, because of the geography, if you're asking someone to fly, how do you get to a regional, in West Texas, if you had a centralized simulation center, it'd be impossible for students to get there. So it depends on what we're talking about. Well, so you drive 8 hours to get to your clinical simulation? I know, but that's what I'm saying. And even for, in East Texas, we've tried that. We did one of our grants was we had, I don't know that this was under a grant, but we did SFA and Angelina and Panola shared a simulation center. And our students just really balked at that. We have to drive an hour? Why can't we come here to this building? It's right here, so we met with a lot of resistance. So I think it depends on what you're talking about, but I'm real excited about the plan to regionalize and share tasks and resources.
It really is a beginning, and I think Beth is right. It's not like the Border Patrol was standing there saying, no, you can't go there, go back. But I think it's a way for us to begin starting to look at regions, and maybe that will encourage us to explore working with some schools that we had not worked with before. That's another possibility.
When we were talking this morning around how the 85 schools, the 13 needed to share. This may be, we've not plotted where they are. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be great if there's at least one in each one of these, that then you could start saying, well, at least share with these in some way, come up with a plan to share with these?
Absolutely.
It just gives us something more manageable than the state of Texas. The enormity of that is really difficult to manage. This coming from somebody who came from Rhode Island, you have to always remember that. That's my point of reference. You could do the entire state and smaller than the Dallas Metroplex.
Well, and have I gotten an email that gave me a list of what schools were in what region?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just haven't looked at it. Is that the one Alexia sent out to start with? Okay. I probably printed it sometime. Okay.
So in the context of these regions, then there is the strategic plan. And I've summarized it on 2 pieces of paper, and I've cheated a little, but we could walk through them briefly and then talk about some of them individually. The starred ones are those where the coordinating board has some responsibility. So if you purely want to look at the ACORN's responsibilities, you could limit it to those that are associated with the coordinating board, since ACORN is a committee of the coordinating board. But obviously Strategy 1.1 is the coalition's legislative agenda, and that will succeed wildly, partially, or not at all. It sort of ends at the end of this legislative session, but if it succeeds wildly or to some extent, we'll have some money to work with. All the schools will, and hopefully they'll be putting some of that money into developing these strategies individually and within these regional networks. Strategy 1.2 is to establish targets for producing graduates, utilizing a business model concept, which in essence says you're developing targets, individual targets, and you're putting on your businessman suit, businesswoman suit, and going to benefactors within your local community and your college president, and talking about them and leveraging resources in order to meet those targets. And the targets are going to be developed by Texas Center for Nursing Workforce Studies and the coordinating board, and I think they'll be done on an individual basis, on a regional basis, and then they'll go to the regions and they can discuss them and augment them. So it's a negotiated process, but obviously we want to get to the individual targets that the Texas Center for Nursing Workforce Studies has projected for us in terms of the number of new nurses we need through 2020. So it's actually giving people benchmarks to work towards, and also a debate point in dealing with people who have money and resources and influence, who can get you the resources if you don't have them, to build the capacity in your program in order to contribute the new nurses that will lead to us meeting the statewide graduation targets.
And when you say individual targets, you do mean at the school level?
Yes, school level. So here's a capacity issue. Calculating graduation rates and promoting best practices. We have that in rules. The Board of Nursing will help us with that, particularly with the NCLEX rates and looking at the best practices. That's already kind of done in many respects. I mean, we're working on that. We're going to be sending out those applications. But again, it gets students, gets into schools focused on those retention issues. On Goal 2, develop regional academic partnerships. These are actually listed as sub-strategies under strategy, but since there's only one strategy under Goal 2, I eliminated it and kind of renumbered these a little bit. But there's nothing else different about that than what you might have read in the strategic plan. And the first one is to support curriculum models which promote regional sharing of resources. And again, we did do a report to the legislature. We had a recommendation which had for a time of recession a pretty big price tag on it. We're not sure they're going to be acting on this with giving us money for any pilots that we would like to develop. So we're anticipating this work would be done through the regions and with maybe some state coordination. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, ma'am.
I think it's going to be very challenging in this case. But again, if you're sharing a common curriculum, there are economies in doing a lot of other things that take your time away from teaching and getting more nursing programs in the program. Strategy 2 is to align regional faculty resources and development initiatives. So we've always felt that we needed a faculty development plan for the state. Maybe that's not doable, but we can certainly do it on a regional basis. And faculty sharing, again, if you have common curriculum content, you're more likely to be able to reduce your need for new nursing faculty by potentially providing instruction maybe via information technology from a faculty member at another institution that has that expertise, content expertise. Strategy 2.3, let's see, interdisciplinary clinical simulation centers. Barbara, you were talking about that. I'm not sure we're going to have necessarily one in each region. I think we already have more than one in each region. But I guess the thought is, and I've observed this myself, is that when you go to a place like maybe the downtown Houston area, each school has its own simulation center. Those simulation centers are equipped with very expensive equipment that would become obsolete very, very quickly, and cost take a lot of expertise to run. They're only going to get probably more expensive, potentially, more sophisticated, and is it helpful to be able to coordinate some of the more advanced instruction with this equipment in a centralized area so those costs can be shared? I don't think it necessarily means that we have to have that people don't have clinical simulation centers, although I'm sure there are some nursing programs in the state who probably don't. But for the more costly equipment that could become obsolete more quickly, we could centralize and share those resources. And this is a strategy that's very much favored by the governor's office. They really see this as an efficiency measure and a coordinating measure that would also help develop more interdisciplinary instruction in the state. So part of this is actually bigger than nursing. It's really relating to other types of health professions as well. I know that UT Arlington had an exceptional item in their legislative appropriations request to build a center like this. How is that going?
Still in. We'll have to see how that progresses.
It was their #1 request to the legislature for new money.
For the university to expand the smart hospital.
Another strategy, the regional clinical placement of students. We know that we have a nursing innovation grant with UTMB to develop an online scheduling system that I think maybe, was it 12, 13 schools participated in? Is that correct? There's nobody from that area. And they're expanding it to Corpus Christi. I know other areas of the state also have these clinical placement systems, but hopefully there'll be better coordination through this regional approach of that type of activity.
A tough thing
as well.
there is we're buying two different lines of software. San Antonio and Austin have the Oregon piece, and the Houston group bought the Bay Area version. And how that's disseminated is probably going to be kind of a headache, you know, when you know, if contingent areas, you know, who might be able to find some capacity can't find it, or double doing to, you know, enter data into different systems. So it's just something to watch. You know, like in Pennsylvania, they started with the Oregon piece, and then they actually pulled back, and the state got funding to develop another system so that it would work for all their schools.
So you're thinking having regions having their own systems is going to be a problem?
Yeah. They don't talk to one another. They don't. These systems don't talk to each other, and the price point is quite different in terms of sustainability. I mean, we picked our as nice as the Bay Area software was, we couldn't afford it, so we went.
Is there still a? The LBB had included a comment about making a requirement on hospitals to report clinical availability. Is that still making its way?
That's one of the bills.
So that's still out there. All our hospital partners will be thrilled.
Senate Bill 790, and it'll require reporting by each of the hospitals to the Texas Center for Nursing Workforce Studies. And Suzanne, didn't you say there was a substitute bill? That I still haven't seen that.
Survey, yeah. And then that data would come to us for reporting, analysis and reporting. But it's, I think the three questions are: how many available clinical hours do you have? How many were used in the previous year? And how many do you have coming year? Very high level.
Okay, so it's not going to be something that gets usable. Okay, no, I was just wondering whether or not we needed to be concerned.
When asked for feedback from one of the legislative offices, my feedback, having been running a system here in Central Texas for 3 years, is that, you know, unless you qualify what kind of hours where for what sort of program, it's relative. I mean, it's absolutely useless information.
You have to know how many units with how many students.
I mean,
on what days.
It's absolutely useless to have
so a.m. on Sunday hours.
And to go back to, I mean, I guess the sense of it, if you read that the LBB thing, is that they would then go to the nursing programs and say, see, we've quantified how many hours are available in clinical placement locally, and you shouldn't be using that as an excuse for not expanding your program. So, I mean, isn't that kind of the tenor of that note? I was like, so I did speak.
But it really,
when asked.
At the level that they're asking for the data, and it's not going to have implications, really, not practical operational implications for this. I was just wondering if it would take us off target, and really that'll be, isn't that interesting information, but not necessarily usable when we look at developing regional clinical placement systems, which need to get down to a level of granularity that
it may
three questions
people
won't get
to
us.
Invest in them because they're going to have to total up hours, and I don't know if there's any other, you know, easy way for. I mean, our hospitals can hit a button and know how many hours they put out last year, and to the extent that they've listed what's open and that we haven't utilized, we'll be able to do that. And that differential, a data point that we have trouble getting, by the way.
I'm getting tired of listening to myself talk. I also might be getting hoarse. So Strategy 5, again, does involve the coordinating board to some extent, and has to do with regional porter or pathway education systems. And we know we've already have some examples of that through Pat Allen's grant with the coordinating board, Stephen F. Austin, and Austin Community College trying to centralize admissions, retention efforts, that sort of thing. And then finally there's goal 3. We're talking about new partnerships. We're going to be getting new nursing programs in the state. We're going to be developing and expanding the partnerships between the nursing programs in the hospitals primarily. That's a THA function, but we have grants in that area right now for the next 2 and even 3 years. And that will still be a major emphasis, and an emphasis at our next Mosaic Partnership Conference on April 3rd and 4th. We also have asset mapping, which I guess my sense is sort of inventorying the resources in your area and making sure you're making the best of them. That's how I summarize that information. And then finally, they're talking about getting more money from outside sources. So I guess my thought is, Leanne, should we begin at least to discuss how we might respond to the strategic plan and some of the activities we would be planning in the future?
And would you like us to do that on a subcommittee basis?
You could. You could have a general discussion now or a specific discussion now, and then maybe have the subcommittee chairs bring this back to their subcommittees? Membership?
Because when I look at this, the first STARD strategy, it looks like Barbara's going to be busy because capacity is involved with many of these items.
Okay.
To me, that's a capacity issue, if I'm seeing that, right? Targets and measures on producing graduates utilizing business model concept.
And retention.
Okay. Wanting to share the wealth.
Capacity. Thank you.
It's really hard to capacity and
I'm used to playing this game.
And even though graduation rates have been calculated, I think the next strategy is both retention and excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps research. Promoting
That's
best practices.
my problem is I'm almost seeing a weaving of these strategies into all of them, and I'm having a hard time pulling them out and how best to address them. Do we just take the output of the committees and place them into each of this
instead of chopping up the...
And so we know we've mapped everything, and nothing's kind of left hanging. But I'm thinking everything is covered somewhere, and in multiple places, at least once. If everything is covered at least once, then it's just a crosswalk, and we don't redo the work of the committee. Possibly.
Well, and I don't think so. I think maybe what the subcommittee chairman might want to do, and maybe we need to come together as a group, the subcommittee chairman and Chris and Donna and Elizabeth and I, and take a look at these in relationship to the goals and objectives that you've set and the work that you've done, and just make sure that they are meshing together.
Yeah,
and
table.
And that we could say, this strategy is being covered by capacity in this area and retention in this area, and maybe even indicate that in the goal, making sure that the language is similar enough that other people could also see how they're connected.
And then when Chris carries as the key person for the higher education coordinating board's lead capacities here, then you'll be able to use that document to carry back to Team Texas to say this is where that work is fit in. Is that the intent?
So do I have a consensus from the subcommittee chairs that they'd be willing to meet and do that?
Call a conference call?
Yeah.
Or in person? What do you want?
On that conference call, are we just going to identify, who's working, where are we?
I think we're going to have some discussion about your objectives. That's why, from my perspective, it would be better to come or go or whatever we want to call it. Be together.
Closely.
Be together. And we don't have to do it in the next week, but perhaps sometime before the semester ends.
Which is
sometime in May.
Yeah.
Or shortly after the semester ends. Are all of you, all you subcommittee chairs, do you work in the summer? Do you get paid in the summer? You don't get paid in the summer?
I'm not committed in that way. I'm online during
You're
the
a
summer.
9-month?
I'm online in the summer, not
You're
physically.
online in the summer.
I may be in town, but I'm not committed to being in town.
Okay. Barbara, do you work in this?
11 month, yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we could induce you if we...
I bet you I could be.
Okay. Okay.
When do I ever say no?
Yeah, right.
She's already
I should
I didn't know that was in your vocabulary. And I think if we work through some of that, then we'll have something to present at the next meeting for everyone to take a look at. What does that sound like?
Sure.
Okay, any other comments then on agenda item 5? We will plan a meeting of the subcommittee chairs then.
I have one question. On 3.3, is there a timeline for this asset mapping process?
Yes, there is. It's in another section of the report.
You have a copy of?
I do. I just haven't read that carefully. I'll read it.
The second attachment, the attachment to the main plan enumerates all of those dates.
I have a question, and I'm very supportive of the regionalization and have been in a lot of conversations with Alexia about this, but this one just hit me when I was sitting here, and we're going to be, as Chris said, presenting this at the Mosaic Conference, so I kind of would like some feedback about this, and that is that when you look at this, the regions, and then you think about asset mapping, what about the regions that have a lot more assets? And how will that
They have to share. They have to send some of those out to the 4 regions.
I think that in the conversation we're going to have at the Mosaic Conference, that's going to come up as a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, how do we envision that? I mean, too bad, so sorry, move to another region. I mean, pick your school up and go over down to the Gulf Coast. I mean, I don't know.
Maybe understanding that will allow us to think about how to create the partnerships with those to have fewer assets at the edge of those boundaries. You know, we talked about it being a blurred line. That's what I was kind of thinking as you were describing that. So if I've got just a really rich area right here, and then I've, not too far from here, I've got somebody that doesn't have as much, those two get paired up. Right now it looks like we don't really have an idea about where those assets are. Is that correct?
I've plugged in the schools that have the 85-85, and each region has one, at least one. But like North Texas has 5, and the Gulf Coast has 4, and Central
That's
Texas.
because they got all the assets.
And everybody else has 1. 3 regions have 1.
That could mean exactly that, that they do have all the assets. And if you think about it from a public health perspective, you need to put your resources where you have your needs. Mm-hmm. And we are very egalitarian. We say everybody has to have something. Yeah. Well, and it may be that one of the challenges when we complete the asset mapping is that we say maybe there's disproportionate share to certain areas for exactly that region, and see if we can't equilibrate the output, whether we're talking volume or we're talking graduation rates and pass rates and those sorts of things. So I think this is the beginning of having a better understanding of it at a level in which we can do something. If we get too small, you can't do anything.
Right.
There's too many component pieces. A single state the size of Texas is too big to do anything. So how do we start managing it.
Well, and I think we have a good example in Texas Tech of an ability to kind of do at least informal asset mapping and move into a region and find
Double dip.
space
Double dip.
to work. No, but I mean, but that's, I think we have a few examples here in Central Texas. Tech is one. Stephen F. Austin is coming here for some specialized rotations that they wouldn't get in their region, that sort of thing where, I just know what I see here on the ground, but I do think that, if schools kind of know what they don't have, some of them, we have some good mentors in terms of being proactive about going out and getting it.
And I think that may be also some guidelines for us to consider when the next group of nursing incentive grants are issued.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's something that...
Supporting those creation of partnerships.
Well, and those areas that don't have as many assets, that maybe they get... Maybe there's some grants that just are for those schools. I think that could have some implications as well.
But we have to understand it. And this is our first real
at least we're
approach to understanding it, the phenomena.
And the asset mapping, I think, will tell us a lot once that's done. Even though we know Dallas and Houston have all the money in the assets. And poor West Texas, my goodness. They got all the land.
They got all the land. Nobody on it.
Land rich.
Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Other comments? Well, the next item on the agenda is a very exciting item because it is an item that is going to provide recognition for the hard work of the members who were elected with one term. So we want to recognize those hard-working members, and that doesn't mean that they won't be back with us for another term. We don't know about that yet, but we certainly want to recognize all those people. And Peggy, I'm so sorry you're not here. Peggy, are you there?
I am.
Oh, yes, good. Because I have the privilege of presenting the very first certificate of appreciation to you, and I will get someone from the coordinating board to mail it to you. And I'll just read it to you. It says, Texas Higher Education. It's a very classy certificate, I want to tell you. It's got a seal on it. Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, Division of Academic Affairs and Research, hereby recognizes Peggy Allen for the services to the state of Texas in nursing education as a member on the Advisory Committee on RN Nursing Education for the term ending March 31st, 2009. Signed by McGregor M. Stevenson, Assistant Commissioner. Yay! Thank you. So we will send that to you.
Everyone go, ooh.
Ooh. The next certificate of recognition goes to Dr. Patricia Allen.
Thank you.
Thank you. In absentia, Joyce Batchelor, who was our one of our practice representatives, so we'll send Joyce's also. Then Dr. Regina Jones-Johnson. Thank you.
Is that going to be money with this?
The same as my salary. And then the last certificate goes to Dr. Josefina Lujan, who's not here, and so we will send her certificate as well. So thank you all. That was the best part of the entire today's agenda, was being able to recognize everyone. I don't know, maybe we should have all gotten certificates for 1 year's work.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Losing two very important of my committee members. I'd like to put in a bid to have them be reappointed.
Okay.
Though I know that that's unsolicited.
That's okay.
Request.
Well, and that doesn't mean they can't be a subcommittee member, even if they're not reappointed.
Okay.
So, you still have it. No, we would never let anyone get away that easy from that opportunity. Okay, the next item on our agenda
and actually, we are now 5 minutes ahead. Can you believe that? We got behind, ahead, is for public comment. So if we have Suzanne or Cindy or any of those who are participating by telephone, if you would like to make some public comments, we would be glad to hear what you all have to say. Bonnie? You all gave up on us.
I wonder if they got lost when it said the conference call ended.
But Peggy was on.
Peggy's still on, though.
So we just had to sign back in.
Well, if there are no public comments, then we will go to item number 8, which are future meeting dates for ACORN. We could all have a meeting next week, except Beth has already told me she's not coming to the Mosaic Conference because she's sending other people. So I guess we'll either have to meet without her in Lubbock, or we'll have to schedule another meeting. But how many people are going to the conference in Lubbock? Okay, well, we can have a small meeting. Chris is going to.
A sub meeting.
A sub meeting, yes, a subcommittee meeting. We would like to have another meeting of the entire committee, probably either late spring or probably in the summer, if that is not a huge issue for people. We ended up meeting towards the end of last summer, I think in August, and we might want to meet in July, certainly after the legislative session, which is the ends in May, a few weeks to get all the nuances of everything that was passed so the legislators can figure out what they passed and tell us.
Grant competition.
And then the grant competition will have to be established based on anything the legislature does as well. So maybe the beginning of July, middle of July. We'll contact everyone. I just wanted you to, and I know people's vacations and all that kind of thing is going to have an impact, but we'll just do the best we can. Yes?
People are tired, or you're not getting much from them, are they? Is there anybody who can't come in July?
I'm going to be out the 7th and the 8th, and then the last week of July.
So the middle would be pretty good for you.
And I'm out 2 weeks in July. I'll be here the week of the 13th, and that's about it.
I'll be here then.
Okay. Okay, so the week of the 13th.
Sounds really good.
Okay. So you'll send out specific dates?
Yes, we'll send out some specific dates soon.
So when would you anticipate the grant information being sent out? I'm just thinking workload-wise, what project?
Probably later than it has in the past. I think we'll be awarding grants in January. If all goes well. So it might be the beginning of the fall semester.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to be talking about some ideas for the grants competition at the Mosaic Conference. So everyone who goes there will at least have kind of an idea about where we might be going with those funds.
Agenda items for the next meeting. One of the things that we have not talked about, and we don't know absolutely because of the legislature, is the very first project that we started on this committee, which was the curriculum model. And we did spend a lot of time, a lot of effort by lots of people on that project. And I think the group that pulled what has become Texas Team together has given us some interesting ideas. I think Chris has gone to some follow-up meetings there, seeing that there are several other states that are working pretty vigorously on developing a common curriculum. So that may be something that we may want to think about again. A lot may depend on the legislative financial situation, and we'll know more about that in May. But that may be an item, if we don't get legislative support and we still think it's something that's important for us to at least look at regionally, if not statewide, then I think that may be an agenda item for us to have more discussion on. How does that sound to all of you? So we'll put that down. Probably the first thing we'll have on our agenda is a recap of what the legislature did to us or did for us. And then we also said we might like Glenda and Eileen to come and make a presentation to this committee on
Would that be too early for them?
the middle of July. Well, they would have some kind of preliminary.
It should be okay for Glenda. We've been meeting very regularly on that grant. As a matter of fact, they're meeting today. I couldn't be there.
Oh, okay.
Glenda and who, I'm sorry?
Eileen from Austin Community College on their identification of high-risk students, looking at admission criteria and all that stuff.
We've got a lot already. So.
Do you? Good. Good. Those are the things that I saw. And then once the subcommittee chairs meet, that may generate a few more agenda items as well. Anything else, anyone? And by then we may have more. By then, Delcy that probably will be an item for us to discuss, as that draft probably will have gone out by then.
And the regional piece?
Yes, the regional piece.
Sounds like a 2-day meeting to me.
Already.
Okay, so I think yes.
I'm sorry, when will we know the new appointees?
We'll make a general announcement sometime between now and the first meeting.
Okay.
Okay. If you have other agenda items, be sure and let us know. Any other comments, questions, or words of wisdom before we adjourn? If not, then we'll adjourn 15 minutes early.
Yay. Way to go, Lisa.
Chris has us all well organized. And thank you, Peggy, very much. She's gone.
She left us together.